All right. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Cool Beans Hot Stuff. This is Film Buff Fridays today, and thank God, man, because I've been having a long day today, which makes me very thankful that today is Friday. Because if you've watched any of the Fridays on my video on my channel, any of my Friday Film Buff videos, then you know I fucking love talking about movies. I love Film Buff Fridays, so it'll be nice to take a break from everything I got going on in my personal life and just focus on talking about stories because I can do that forever and ever. In fact, I'm suspecting that tonight is probably going to be a much longer stream than I usually do. I usually try to stick around a 2 hour long stream. And we got a lot to go over tonight, and it's stuff that I enjoy going over. This is fun stuff to talk about. I'm excited to talk about it with you. So yeah, it's probably going to be a long stream tonight. I just started streaming. I think this is only my fourth Friday, technically, of streaming. So we won't have a lot of people tuning in. Cutie Pie might be there. If you are, hey, Cutie Pie. And if not, then it might just be me hanging out, talking about things I love. If you see this video on YouTube, then I hope you enjoy the content. And if you do, please like, give it subscribe, and hey, hot stuff. And give me a subscribe and a thumbs up if you enjoy the content. And come back come look at some more Film Buff Friday videos. I got them all in a playlist on my YouTube channel somewhere. And speaking of the YouTube channel, I've been working on and probably won't have it done until this weekend, getting all of the sources for every one of my videos, all the web pages we're going to be exploring today, or at least most of them. Some of these are private documents. The one you see on your screen now is a private document I wanted to share with you guys. But mostly web pages that we're going to be looking at in all my streams, I found a way or to link them to my YouTube. So I'm going to get all those linked up probably this weekend and then start putting chapters in all my YouTube videos, kind of up the quality of my YouTube videos a teeny tiny little bit. And then I'm still working on getting the damn crackle and pop out of my live stream recordings. There it is, like on cue. Um, yeah, that fucking thing, man. I don't know. I've been updating drivers, changing all kinds of stuff in my Windows, but this is my first time ever having a PC. And so, I'm a Mac user, and us Mac users, man, we're not used to having to finagle and fiddle fuck with all this extra shit in your computer. You just get it and it works, and that's fine. But PCs, you got to put a lot of finagling into them, a lot of customization. So there's a whole lot that I'm learning about this. So it's going to take me a minute to get rid of that digital distortion you hear. So you'll have to bear with me there. But it's not too horrible. It's a lot better than it was. And hopefully by next week or the week after, I'll have this fucker nipped and my audio will be sounding much better. I also got a bunch of more sound proof panels coming today, and I will be probably gluing those up sometime next week. Whenever we have a rainy day like today, where I'm at, it's rainy as balls, so can't go out and do nothing in the yard or work on the house. So next rainy day, I'll be able to glue up some more sound panels, and the sound will even be better in that way too. So, improvements coming to the stream in teeny tiny little bits. But anyway, so stay tuned for that. Anyways, so if you clicked on the channel, whether on YouTube or on the live stream, chances are you came here because you like the title of the title of the video, Elements of Storytelling. So let's get into that. So on Film Buff Fridays, obviously pretty self-explanatory. I go over films, everything film related. And these last 3 Fridays, we've been mostly going over film theory type stuff, right? We had the 8 elements of film theory, kind of an introduction to film theory, and then we had a introduction to film analysis, where I kind of broke down the difference between film theory, film analysis, film reviews, and give you just an all-around introduction, you and me, an introduction to the topic, because film theory is a new topic for me too. That's a part of these live streams that I enjoy, is I get to learn all kinds of shit and then share what I learned with you guys. So I'm learning all kinds of stuff, and today is going to be no different. Today, though, we're not going to be going over anything we're not going to be doing a lot of film theory, any film theory type stuff. Today, we're going to be focusing on narration or storytelling. And so I wanted to do this, focus on the narration aspect of making a movie or writing a story, probably the last Friday of every month, just because, well, I'm a writer, and that's this little blue link above my camera. That's a URL to my Substack where I post a lot of my writing. I love writing and do it every day. And really, when like a lot of people who write, I when I watch a movie, my most effective critical eye for a movie. When I'm critiquing a movie, 9 times out of 10, what I'm best at critiquing or most effective at critiquing is the story and the plot, the writing in the story, and everything that has to do with that, right? When it comes to acting or special effects, I'll be the first one to tell you that I fucking suck at judging special effects or acting. I'll watch a movie with an actress or an actor do their thing, and I'm like, wow, that was good. And everybody, unanimously, every person I know is like, bro, that fucking sucked. And I'm like, really? I thought it was really good. They're like, that was ass. That was the shittiest acting I have ever seen. And I'm like, wow, fuck, geesh, okay. So I guess I just suck at acting. I guess I just don't know what the fuck good acting looks like. Which is, it is what it is. We all have things we're good at, things we're bad at. I apparently, you could be as stiff as a board, worst actor in the world, and I'll think you're fucking great. I'll be your biggest fan, apparently. Same with special effects. I'm not a special effects artist, so I can watch a movie with absolutely horrible CGI and it doesn't like pull me out of the movie at all. I almost don't even notice it until somebody points it out and they're like, wow, that was shitty CGI. And I was like, oh, yeah, I guess you're right. That was kind of shitty, wasn't it? I didn't even realize, like they tried to make a giant monkey and it looked like a big ass giant monkey to me. So I was satisfied, But when it comes to story, you can ask my cutie pie. I pull a movie apart. I rip it into shreds, characters, plot lines, everything, theme, the overall tone, the message of the movie, conflicts in the movie, all of it. If any of it doesn't work for me, then I'm like, nope, it's a shitty movie. And people be like, bro, this won like 15 Oscars, dude. Did you see how good the lead actress was? Did you see how hot she was? And I'm like, I don't care. It was a shitty fucking movie. I didn't like anything about it. So for me, that's just where my mind navigates. And a lot of it is because I'm focusing on the aspects that you would see in a written story, right? Because I'm writing is my craft, it's my go-to, it's something I enjoy doing, it's my creative outlet at this point in my life. And that's the perspective through which I watch a movie, right? So it's something that I know a little bit more about when it comes to film, when it comes to movies. I know a lot about the storytelling aspect of that. And that's something that I can share with my viewers, a little bit of my quote unquote expertise, and also something that I love to get schooled on and learn more about as I'm, in my whole writing journey, career, life, all that. Whenever I can, if I can read a little bit more about how to be a better writer, I'm going to do it. And doing a stream specifically on storytelling or the elements of storytelling, I'll explain that here in a minute, gave me a good opportunity to do a lot of research. And, I put together a quick 2-hour stream worth of research. This will probably end up being closer to a 3-hour stream, but a good 3-hour-ish stream worth of material that covers all of the elements of storytelling, so that by the time you guys have finished watching this stream, this video on YouTube, whatever it is, you guys will have a pretty good idea of everything that goes into creating a really good story, right? You at least have a very foundational idea of how to pick out specific elements in a story and say, okay, well, this is the plot and there's the theme, here is the conflict, this is the point of view, yada, 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 so on and so forth. You guys will know all about that, okay? So that's my little intro. So what that leads me to my next point, or I guess question: what are elements of storytelling? Well, I don't really know if there's actually is a thing of called the elements of storytelling, or if I don't think these are universally accepted concepts that we're about to talk about, or the idea that these are the elements of a story. That particular wording, the elements of a story or elements of storytelling, I kind of just put that together myself when I decided I wanted to get into writing. I wrote which is as you do. You know, if you want to be a writer, you should write. If you want to be a singer, you should probably sing. If you want to make movies, and you should probably go out and make movies, right? That's kind of like the first step, or the at least the most important step. You want to be a guitar player, you better start fucking playing guitar, bro. You know, it's kind of impossible to do one and not the other. So I started writing, and I realized my writing was shit. Right, again, as you do. First time doing something, realize, whoo, you fucking suck at this, bro. And realized I had to put a little bit more effort into learning how to do it, you know? So I started, you know, I didn't know what went into building a story. You know, that was my first question, is what are the building blocks, essentially, of a story? What do I have to put a story together, right? Like, I know I have to have like a main character, and then, you know, like something has to happen in the story. I know I have to have this thing called a plot, but what the fuck really is that? You know, everybody talks about it. Everybody I know, you know, my mom is like, bro, the fucking plot of that movie. But, you know, does anybody know what it is? You know, how many people around me use the word plot and actually know what the fuck a plot even is? You know, because I use that word, and the truth is, I don't actually know what it is. I couldn't give you a definition of it. You know, at least I couldn't at the time. I was like, you know, I always reference the plot of a movie. But if somebody ever asked me, what is the plot of this movie? I'd be like, I don't fucking know, bro. Everybody knows, dude. Why are you asking me, you fucking dick? You know, I'd probably play it off like I had, you know, like, oh, you know, it's, you know, everybody knows. You know, I don't need to answer that, dignify you. But no, for real, I just didn't, you know, when I thought about it, I realized I don't actually know what goes in to writing a good quality story. So I looked it up and said, okay, what are the things that you need to have in a story? What are the building blocks of a story? Or what are the necessary elements of a story? And that is where my writing education, I guess, started. With this document that you have right here. This document that you see before you is my golden grail of storytelling notes. It is there a page count on here? Well, this is, well, here it is. I was going to say well over 300 pages worth of notes, almost 400 pages of notes that I've collected from every single class, every single article, every single piece of good advice any other writer has given me that I learned and thought, ooh, I should remember this. I put it all into this document right here. I've been doing it for about the last, you know, I don't even know, 8 years. I mean, if we did, I'm 35. Let's say two. So yeah, about 7 years. So, and it starts with, at the beginning, elements of a story. This was right where this document started. I said, well, what the fuck are the elements of a story? What are the building blocks that I need to learn in order to be able to write a good story? So, that's what we're going to be going in today. We're going to be going into what are those elements. And the first step in my journey was looking for, you know, like I said, these elements. And like I said before, nobody actually had a definite answer for me, because this wasn't a universally accepted concept or anything, right? It wasn't like you type it in and there's people who are like, oh, well, this is the first thing you learn in literature 101. Like, that wasn't a thing. So what I had to do is had to go around the internet, reading from various, let's see, like literature professors, well-known writing websites, well-known or famous YouTube channels that dedicated to writing, you know, things like that. Eventually pick up a few writing classes of my own and start recording the information. But eventually I just went from source to source to source, hearing from different sources what the 5 most important aspects of storytelling are. And each one was different. Each source gave me not necessarily a completely different answer, in some cases a completely different answer, right? This is one source right here. The 5 elements of a story are characters, setting, plot, conflict, and resolution. Okay. Theory 2 that I found was settings, characters, plot, conflict, theme, point of view, tone, and style. And then this guy says characters, plot, setting, point of view, style, theme, and literary devices. So you see what I'm getting on. I went through, and it just keeps going. And it just keeps going. And yep, it just keeps going. So I just went over and over and over again, trying out all these different sources that I could find to try to figure out what exactly were the most important building blocks of a story. And what it came down to was my own theory. what I said is, okay, I took everybody else's ideas, everybody else's theories, and said, I'm going to go ahead and take all the information that I've just ingested and use it to build my own outline of the qualities I need to have in order to write a good story. So like I haven't actually even read this in years. Elements of a story summary. So this is after all this research, this is eventually the conclusion I came to. So there are several theories on what constitutes the basic, most needed elements of the story. All in all, it appears as though there are universally considered 5 elements that make up the most basic, I said twice, elements of a story, along with a handful of more advanced, not nearly as needed, but still important elements that is important to be aware of. So here is my breakdown of these specific elements. You can see in that summary just how bad my grammar was when I first started writing. Still important elements that is important to be aware of. Horrible grammar. Jeez. After this breakdown is my basic interpretation of what each one means, created via the descriptions above. I have also broken each individual element into a subcategory where applicable, although it should be noted that these subcategories do not cover all of the possible variations that exist. This will all be covered in depth at a later date, one element at a time, right? So, very professional there I was, except for my horrible grammar. So this was the theory that I came to, which is the theory that I'm going to show you guys, or at least that I'm going to use as a outline to go over this information with you guys. Really, this is just the outline of our journey, learning about what it takes to build a high quality story. What are the building blocks of a good story, right? And so you can go, you can borrow this philosophy of mine or this thinking, or you can say, fuck you, it sucks, and just pick out what you like about it, or go out, research, and find your own, or use somebody else's. I go find a source that you really trust and use what their idea of the 5 elements or 10 elements or 7 elements or 27 elements of a good story are, right? But this is just mine, and I'm just sharing it with you, not necessarily to say that it's correct. Like, oh, look I did 20 pages of writing to come to this. You shall believe me. Like, just saying, like, well, no, this is, after a little bit of research, this is what I ended up with. And I will say that it ended up working. I have used these 10 elements of a story to write hundreds and hundreds of stories in the last few years, and a few of those stories have won me writing competitions. I've had a couple short stories published, and so it has been, at least in some sense, moderately successful. At least it's bringing me a moderate amount of success, more success than I would have had if I didn't go out there and try to figure out what these elements of a story are. Okay, so this is my theory. It is the 10 elements of a story. First is your 5 most important elements. In order is plot, character, setting, conflict, and theme. Those are the 5 most important elements of a story. You absolutely need to have those things in a story in order for a story to work and be enjoyable. And then you have the 5 secondary elements that are important, but they're not necessary, right, in order to call something a story. So you have POV, and this is, again, I would put it in order as POV, tone, style, mood, and symbolism. Style kind of goes with literary. I put style and literary devices together as the same thing because they do closely link up, but POV, tone, style, and literary devices, mood, and symbolism are the 10 10 elements of a story. All right. So that's my theory. That's my working idea. And I've had it for the last several years and it's worked really well. So that's what the order in which that's a basic idea that I'm going to use to jump through and share with you guys what all of the different elements of a story are, right? We're going to start with the first element, plot. And I'm going to share with you a bunch of different information that I found on the interwebs and fill you in on what a plot is, and we're going to move on to characters, and then we're going to move on to setting, and so on and so forth, until we've gone through all 10 elements of a story. And you have a at least decent understanding of all of them. Okay, so I do want to say, or maybe address a potential question that viewer might have. What the fuck does this have to do with movies? Well, because we are coming at this, I came at this from the angle of somebody who wants to learn how to write good stories. And it's like, well, how does that go with the movie. Well, everybody understands that a film is visual storytelling, right? But it is still storytelling. There's certain elements here that you aren't going to see in film, like literary devices, for example, or, well, most literary devices, or some of them, right? Like, you're not going to be seeing alliteration in a movie, because alliteration is, that's uh, how the author arranges, right? It's a sequence of words that have the same starting sound or the same starting letter, right? Like Black Beauty, that is a example. But you're not going to see that in movies, because alliteration in movies, because there isn't written words in a movie, obviously. But you are going to see things like dramatic irony is a component of certain movies that use it very effectively. That was at first a literary device used in a book, and is now something that people do employ in movies, and so we'll go over stuff like that. So that was the first thing I wanted to say before we dive in, was this does have a lot to do with the concept of writing a good story, whether that's telling a good story through movie or telling a good story through writing. They involve more or less the same elements, right? So this is, again, just me using a framework that I've used for a long time to help me understand all of these concepts in a way, and just to use it to run through these concepts with you so you understand them better, and then you can utilize these concepts as a way of critiquing movies. When you're watching them, you can look at a movie and say, okay, what is the plot? What are the characters? What is the setting? Well, who is the foil? Who is the secondary character? What are the character archetypes that we're seeing here? What are the 4 different characteristics of setting that we see in this scene right here? You'll be able to pinpoint all of this out, and it just all around gives you a better way. It is a better way to inform yourself when watching a movie. You're going to be a more informed watcher, a more informed viewer, as it is. And that is the kind of the goal for my Film Buff Fridays, to make you and me better at film reviews and film critiquing and film analysis. And the last thing I want to say before we jump into it, deep dive. I try to say jump and deep dive into it at the same time, and it came out as dump dive. Before we dump dive into this, I did also want to say that each element itself is so filled to the brim with information out there. There is some, like plot, for example. There is so much you can say about plot. This is a one little tiny component of storytelling that you are never gonna be done learning about. I mean, there's just so many different types of plot structures. What even is a plot structure? Some people might not even know what the fuck that is. What is a plot line, a plot hole, a through line, a pinch point? What are the 3-act structure versus the hero's journey? What the fuck are you even talking about? This is this one element here. There's so much information you can to digest, and there's just so much time you can spend talking about it. It's never ending. And so we're just going to go over a rough outline of each one. I'm going to give you like the basics of each element so you can understand it, see it, understand the basic concept behind it. We'll get a little bit into each one, but for the most part, the deep dives are actually going to happen at the last Friday of every month. Next month, May, the very final Friday of May, will be a entire 2 to 3 hour long stream on just plot. And we will be learning just about plot. And then the following month, the very final Friday, will be a 2 to 3 hour stream of just talking about characters. Okay? So that's how I had it set up. I am not giving you all of the information that I have because it's just way too much information. But I am going to deep dive through each one. We're going to try to spend 15 minutes on each one. Again, that's going to be hard to cram as much as we can into 15 minutes, but we're going to do it. We're going to figure it out, and I'm going to go over, but that's okay because I enjoy hanging out with you and talking about this shit, right? So, okay, let's jump into it. And then that brings us to our first element, which is plot. That's the most important one, in my opinion. I do think a lot of people would agree with that statement. So what is a plot, right? Everybody seems to know, or everybody seems to use the word plot when they're talking about their favorite movie. I really like the plot of this movie, or that plot was really slow, or, oh, that plot, you had so many holes in it. And, it's one of those things, like I said, like, do you know what a plot is? Could you give me the definition? Because I knew I did that my entire life until I was like 27, 28 years old. That's a common way for people to speak, at least in America, and at least in all the different cities I've lived in America, which is a lot. Everybody always referenced the plot of a movie, but then, when I thought about it, I was like, I don't actually know what the fuck that is. So what is it? Well, definition of plot: the direction of a story's main events and incidents and how they relate to one another. defined as the sequence of actions in a story or actions of the characters. It is the connective tissue that links events or actions with meaning, also defined as a series of events deliberately arranged so as to reveal their dramatic, thematic, and emotional significance. It is the what, why, and how, or a series of actions with a cause and effect relationship. That seems like a pretty giant definition. That's because I took the definition from like 2 different dictionaries and 3 different sources and crammed them all together. But what a plot is at its most broken down is a series of actions with a cause and effect relationship. Here's a really good way of simplifying the idea of a plot. This is not it. Give me 1 second to find it. This person, that's not it either. Okay, so nope, that's not it neither. Where did I find that? It had to be on this one. Let's see. Let's define plot. Yada yada yada. So, shoot, I was really hoping there. No, that isn't it. There it is. Okay, thank God. All right. Okay, so this is a really great way to think of plot when you're thinking of what the definition of a plot is. Here, let's read this, and then we'll come back and talk about it. What are the differences between plot and story? Many writers use plot and story interchangeably, but they have distinct meanings. Understanding plot definition is key to distinguishing the two. The story is simply a sequence of events, while the plot is how those events are structured with cause and effect. So, English novelist E.M. Forster explains it best. E.M. Forster explains it best. A story is, an example of a story would be the king died and then the queen died. A plot would be the king died and then the queen died of grief. So, in other words, a story is what happens, while a plot is why it happens. This distinction is crucial in writing because a well-structured plot keeps the audience engaged by building tension and resolution. So, we go back to my definition here. A plot is a sequence of events or series of actions with a cause and effect relationship. That cause and effect aspect is what makes a plot a plot. And this is a pretty common idea, widely accepted notion in the world of literature, writing, all of that, that a plot is basically a series of events, or in some cases, you'll see it up here, I have it, a series of logical events that have cause and effect relationship between them. Okay, it is this happens, and then because of that, this happens, and then because of that, this happens. There is a good video out on YouTube that always seems to pop up in my feed like every couple of years, which I appreciate, of just coming a fucking ninja at blocking out those burps, man. There's a really interesting video with Trey Parker and Matt Stone, the South Park guys, actually. They were in a class, I think at University of Colorado, maybe in Boulder, giving a conversation, a literature class, writing class, whatever, storytelling class, whatever it is, giving them the rundown of a plot. And the video is up on YouTube. They have a short, too, that I've seen floating around where Trey Parker and Matt Stone explain to these college kids what makes a story good is being able to move from beat to beat in a story. And a beat is something we'll get into that a little later. It's not necessarily a scene. A beat is made up of scenes, but it's a particular point in a story. Let's just think of that for now. Moving from one particular point in a story to another particular point in a story using the words so, because, or therefore. If you connect the beats of your story using the words and then, like the king died, or the king died and then the queen died, notice that and then. If you have to connect the beats of your story with the words and then, or and, it's because your story fucking sucks. It's what it really is because there is no actual cause and effect relationship between the events in your story. So moving from one event to another event in the story, you should have to say something like the king died, therefore the queen died of grief. Okay, the queen's reason for dying was the king dying first. There is a cause and effect relationship, and you connect that using the word so. The king died, so the queen died of grief. Therefore, because, which would be kind of, you flip it the opposite, the queen died because the king died. The queen died of grief because the king died, right? That would be a cause and effect relationship. Let's see. There was a fourth one, I thought. So, because, therefore, and there's a fourth one, but it doesn't matter. You need to be able to connect the events in your story using a cause and effect relationship. That's the general gist, and it's to the point that any good writer is going to be able to tell you that. This is like basic writing 101 type shit and basic storytelling 101 type shit, right? So that's important to note. Let's see. We'll go into a plot hole here in a minute. I was going to save that for the plot video, but plot hole is one of those things that irks me. It's too many people use the word plot hole and don't know what it means. And it is what it is. Like, it's not that big of a deal, but I would just thought I would let you guys know what a plot hole is. So from this point on, you don't use it incorrectly, right? But so anyways, I think we got a pretty good definition of plot, at least what it is. When we deep dive into plot, we're going to have to inevitably talk about plot structure, right? So a plot is a series of events with a cause and effect relationship. So, which leads me to my next concepts here that is important to grasp: a plot structure. A plot structure is a process. It is a planned or structured series of events. It is a plan that you can use to outline, like a roadmap essentially, that you can use to plan out the events in your story, or at least a concept of how the events in your story should run, right? So there's a lot of different plot structures out there. There's a lot of different ways of illustrating a plot structure. Let's see if any of this is important. So this is kind of an interesting concept that I learned. Some people say there are only two real plots in the world, and every story is just a variation of those two plots. And they are: one, someone goes on a journey, or two, a stranger comes to town. A plot structure, your most basic understanding of plot structure would be setup, which is the situation happens; a build-up, which is a complication of the situation; and then the payoff, which is the resolution of the complication. I always think of it as send the hero up a tree, throw rocks at them, bring them back down again. That's your most basic plot structure right there. That right there would be, that signifies a plot. That is a plot structure. It is just a way in which the events of a story happen. And you can take that metaphor and put it onto any story. Go watch your favorite movie, and it's going to be more or less similar to that plot structure I just outlined. You bring the hero up a tree, you give them a tower to climb, you throw rocks at them, make it really hard on them, and then you bring them back down. You end the journey, right? Put them on a journey, make the journey hard, bring them back home. That's your most basic plot structure right there. The very first plot structure is actually Aristotle's unified plot. So we understand the basic idea of what a plot structure is, but there are a lot of different plot structures. Here's a very common one. There's tons of them, but here's a very common one. Most share the elements outlined in Freytag's pyramid. Freytag's pyramid is a plot structure. Freytag's pyramid is a framework developed by German novelist Gustav Freytag that outlined a 5-part structure for dramatic storytelling, which includes exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and the denouement. This very heavily corresponds. Let's just give you the brief rundown. Exposition is the backstory that explains circumstances surrounding the film's narrative. Rising action, and this right here is a plot structure diagram giving you a way to kind of visualize this. So here's the exposition at the beginning of the story. As the story continues, we get rising action, which is a sequence of events that builds interest, tension, and suspense. And this particular, due to the age 1863 in which this pyramid was created, the word climax meant something a little different. So the climax of this particular plot structure happens right more or less at the 50% mark of the story. You can see it at the top of the pyramid there. Their definition of a climax is the point where the action crescendos, which usually results in the conclusion of the main conflict. And then, which actually, that is a pretty good example of what everybody's idea of a climax is. I've found it a little bit differently. Falling action comes after the climax. That is the story. You can see that's right here. Boom. Falling action is a sequence of events that deal with the aftermath of the climax. And then we have the denouement, or conclusion. Denouement is another word for conclusion. Denouement is a resolution that gives final context to the narrative's events. So this is very similar to Aristotle's unified plot. Notice how they're all in pyramids. Aristotle's unified plot has 3 basic aspects: a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? So you have your exposition, climax, denouement, or more or less, right? We're gonna get we can get into Freytag's Pyramid a little bit deeper because I definitely spent a lot of time reading into Freytag's Pyramid. Here's it again: exposition, beginning, middle, climax, and resolution, rising action and falling action in between, right? So that's a basic, two of your most basic plot diagrams, right? And that's what those are, diagrams illustrating a particular plot. This is another way to look at it. Exposition happens before the action starts rising, climax happens in the middle, falling action after the climax, and the resolution is the end result of that falling action. This is how I learned about Freytag's Pyramid, taking it and mirroring it against the 3-act structure. So take a look at this plot diagram right here on the screen. Here, let me throw up the YouTube screen so it's a little bigger. Freytag's Pyramid versus traditional 3-act story structure. So you have your beginning, middle, and end. So the Freytag's Pyramid and the 3-act structure also map on to Aristotle's unified plot. You have your beginning, your rising action going up, which it would be this moment in the 3-act structure right here. 3-act structure is in red. The middle of the 3-act structure coincides with the climax of Freytag's Pyramid. Then you have your falling action, where your resolution of the 3-act structure combines with, well, this is called the catastrophe on this particular graph. The catastrophe is another term that people will use interchangeably for the denouement, but it's mostly used when you are talking about a tragedy. Back in the day, there used to be tragedies and comedies. Tragedies ended in catastrophe. Comedies ended, with the happy-go-lucky, everybody wins sort of situation. So this would be more, a catastrophe would be the denouement in a tragedy. Notice here, the climax is the middle point on Freytag's Pyramid. This is more the climax on the 3-act structure. This is what we consider climax today, where it's the actual end of the story. It's the final bit of the story, right? So that's one way of looking at it. Those are two of the simplest plot structures that you are going to be using whenever you're writing a story or you're looking at a story. Whenever you're trying to analyze a plot, it's always good to be able to break the plot up in a beginning, a middle, and an end. Switch over to this screen. And then be further, I personally don't break stories down into like rising action and falling action. Again, Freytag's Pyramid was written in 1863. Again, the word climax means something different for him than it technically did for us. But what most people use in terms of plot structures nowadays, especially when it comes to movies, is going to be, well, there's 3 main ones. The first one is 3-act structure, right? And we're not going to play this whole video about 3-act structure because I'm going to go into that much heavier at a different date. Here we go. But 3-act structure is one of your most common plot structures for film, right? And here's a whole checklist that I have in my notes for 3-act structures, a whole bunch of mistakes. This is a bummer that this is sideways, but this would be your typical 3-act structure. You got Act 1, Act 2. Act 1 takes about 25%. Act 2 takes the middle 50% of a movie. Act 3 takes the final 25%. 3-act structures are so important. And this is a good YouTube video. This is by Studio Binder. We will be watching it at some point in the stream, but that's probably going to come at a later date. The 3-act structure, a little bit on that. Okay, let's move to the rant screen. So when it comes to 3-act structure, it is such a widely, universally accepted way of writing your plots that there are certain movies that can map on almost perfectly to a 3-act structure time-wise, right? So my beard is not looking good in the big screen. I went and took kind of a nap before I came down, so my beard is all crazy. Look at this craziness over here. Just wants to do its own thing. Well, it is what it is. To help me understand plot structure, so let's take it from this angle. To help me understand how a plot moves and specifically how plot structure works and how to be able to pick out the specific points in a three-act structure, especially because three-act structures are so common in Hollywood. Created, oh, we'll need my YouTube screen back. I created this little document that I use, which is my what I forget what I actually call this, but it is my plot worksheet is what it is. There we go. My plot worksheets, my three act structure worksheets, where I will watch a movie, and as I'm watching the movie, I will write what the opening scene is, what the inciting event is, what the act one turning point is. I'll write down the sequences or Hollywood's 8 sequences. We'll get into those in a little bit. All the information that is supposed to be revealed within the first act, I'll write that all down. And then as the movie continues, I'll write down where the midpoint reversal is, the disaster or second turning point, the Act 2 disaster. And then we'll go back into sequences. All of the components that's necessary for the Act 2. And then we get into the Act 3. I'll write down what the climax is, the resolution and the wrap up. I'll write down the time in which each one of these, I guess you could say, beats happens. And then, of course, all the information that's supposed to be revealed in that three-act structure. I even have one for Freytag's Pyramid, Aristotle's Unified Plot. The reason why I do this is it's really good practice for being able to visualize, being able to pick out what the inciting event is in one of my favorite movies, or what the midpoint reversal is in one of my favorite movies. We didn't go over that too much because we're not going to have a whole lot of time to do that. The midpoint reversal is actually the name used in the three-act structure for what Freytag would call the climax. It's the midpoint in your story. It's when the action reverses. Some major, usually fake achievement happens, but some massive reversal in fortune takes place and the story changes. And that usually marks the midpoint of a story. So this is a great way. I do this as a way to get better at identifying key points in a plot in a movie, which in turn helped me get much better at plotting out my own stories, right? So that was kind of the concept of doing this, getting good at it. Anyways, so part of what this is, I would sit down and I would write out these worksheets while I watch movies. Getting better at finding out, being able to analyze and see all these different plot points in a movie and being able to pick them out and see what some of the best movies in the world did with their plot points and what was the midpoint reversal in like The Matrix, for example, or this or that or whatever. So pick the best movies that have ever been made and learn how to see what their plot looked like. Visualize it from a plot structure perspective, right? And so, funny enough, the three-act structure was such a big deal in Hollywood for such a long time, and still is, but so many Hollywood writers, screenplay writers, use three-act structure as more than just like a roadmap or a guideline, but use it as such a very strict way of structuring their videos their stories, that there is numerous very famous movies out there where the three-act structure lines up perfectly with the actual time of the movie. So the midpoint reversal in a three-act structure happens at roughly around the 50% mark of a story. If you take the runtime of The Matrix or Jaws or Jurassic Park or Independence Day, it works with all 4 of those movies. If you take the total runtime, divide it, find your halfway point in the movie, say it's an hour or say it's 56 minutes, then go through the movie at the 56-minute mark. The very exact halfway point of the movie's runtime is exactly when your midpoint reversal happens. That's how strict some of these screenplay writers were, and directors and producers, in adhering to the three-act structure. They were so strict that their scripts actually lined up perfectly to the three-act structure, and the final product literally lined in time, in minutes and seconds, lined up to what would be the 25% mark of your story, the 50% mark of your story. The Act 2 disaster happens around the 75% mark of a story. You would calculate where's the 75% moment in the Matrix, get the hour, minute, and second marker. And that's exactly when the Act 2 disaster would happen. So, pretty interesting. That is how important the three act structure is. And this is kind of a funny note, too. Any Quentin Tarantino fans out there, Quentin Tarantino despises the three act structure, hates it, and hates the idea that you should have to write a story in a three act structure. You can go look up quotes that he said of how useless and pointless and dumb it is to need a plot structure for your movie. And he rejects the idea wholeheartedly, still does to this day, which is a big part of the reason why he makes so many non-linear plots. A linear plot or a chronological plot would be a plot where the events happen in chronological order. That would be a linear plot. A non-linear plot is when the story would jump in between two plot lines, or maybe you'd watch the first half of the story and the first half happened before the second half. So it's telling it in a way that's not a linear measurement of time, right? We're hopping between different points in the story or something like that, right? You can think of millions of movies that did it, but almost any Quentin Tarantino movie actually does that. Almost, not all of them. Jackie Brown, I believe, was a pretty linear plot. But think of Pulp Fiction, Reservoir Dogs. Nothing that's happening in it is linear. A lot of times, it's jumping on its timeline of events. It's bouncing back and forth as it's telling you the story, right? Think Hateful Eight. Okay, so that happens a lot in Quentin Tarantino movies because Quentin Tarantino hates the three act structure, doesn't want to adhere to it. But it's really hilarious if you take any Quentin Tarantino movie, okay, and map it onto the three act structure. It's not going to be like Jaws or The Matrix. It's not going to be exactly down to the minute that the midpoint reversal happens. But it does still map on to the three act structure. His movies, in spite of the fact that he wrote them with no three act structure, does not like the three act structure, and in some cases even attempted his best to avoid writing in a three act structure. Ended up writing in a three act structure, even in his movies that have 5-6 acts. Funny enough, at this point now, the three act structure has been modified into a 5-act structure, a 6-act structure, and an 8-act structure. There's even a 10-act structure, which got turned into another very popular plot structure in Hollywood called, Hollywood's 8 sequences is kind of just a redo of the 8-act structure. This is another plot structure. Here's the basis for it. You got your Act 1. See, it perfectly maps on to the 3-act structure. In your first act, you have first and second sequences, and the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and the seventh and the eighth sequences, right? And you notice down here you have setup, development, resolution, or beginning, middle, and end, which maps onto the unified plot structure from Aristotle, or exposition, climax, and denouement, which maps on perfectly to Freytag's pyramid. And then the last other major plot structure that people use in Hollywood is called Save the Cat, or the Save the Cat beat sheet, right? And this is, as you can see, oh, you can't see because you're not on there, my bad. I forgot that I went to my rant screen. Okay, so let's go back up here. Here's your Hollywood's 8 sequences right here. So you have 3-act structure up here. There's your 8 sequences down there. There's your setup or exposition, your development or middle or your climax, and then here's your resolution or your denouement. So all of the plot structures that I've talked about, from 3-act structure, Hollywood 8 sequences, Aristotle's unified plot, and Freytag's pyramid, they all map onto each other, which is pretty incredible. And as does the Save the Cat beat sheet. But as you can see, the Save the Cat beat sheet, it has 15 beats in it that you want to more or less hit. Each one of those when you are writing your story. And then there is other very important, very common plot structures out there. We have, there's your Save the Cat right here. Okay. This is actually the book Save the Cat by Blake Snyder. Blake Snyder was the one that basically, I guess, discovered it, you could say, more or less devised the concept. This is another very good YouTube video. We'll probably watch that when we go over Save the Cat, because again, you can do a whole 2-hour stream on just Save the Cat. And then you have the hero's journey, or the modified variation of the hero's journey, which would be Dan Harmon's story circle. Dan Harmon, by the way, is a dude who writes Rick and Morty, and he uses the story circle for all Rick and Morty episodes, the community. He invented, or will just modify, the hero's journey, which was a circular plot structure. Notice, Freytag's pyramid was obviously a pyramid. Unified plot was a pyramid. People usually use a W plot structure for the 3-act the three act structure usually happens in a W diagram. Hollywood's 8 sequences is usually broken up into some visual for 8 different components. Hero's journey is a circle. It's right here behind him. Bloop. There's your story circle. But in any case, it's still a plot diagram that if you were to take that circle, the hero's journey, and break it and lay it flat from the first event to the last event, it would map almost perfectly over the three act structure, which is one of the reasons why the three act structure is such a massive component to such a big deal in the writing world, right? In screenplay writers, film, Hollywood, everybody tries to navigate towards it. Again, even Quentin Tarantino, who did not like the three act structure, still doesn't. You can map all of his stories onto a three act structure. So that's the most important concepts to understand about plot. Just your good basic rundown. What is a plot? You guys now know what a plot is. The most basic is a sequence of actions with a cause and effect relationship. A logical sequence of actions with a cause and effect relationship. And the cause and effect relationship is incredibly important, right? You understand what a plot is. You understand what a plot structure is, and you have a rough idea of what the main plot structures are, right? Your main ones are going to be your hero's journey, your three act structure, and then some of the first two plot structures ever invented, Aristotle's unified plot, which if we go up here, I'm pretty sure he invented that. Let's see if we can just, if I wrote down a time frame for when Aristotle actually invented, Freytag's pyramid invented in 1863. And unified plot structure, I think, it was before Jesus. Let's see. Aristotle's, no, that's complex plots, yada, yada, yada. Released 2,300 years ago. Okay, so that was the first instance of a plot structure, was Aristotle's unified plot, Freytag's pyramid. But the most important ones you're going to be using nowadays if you write a story, which those both still map on to these ones. The most important modern day ones you're going to be using is the hero's journey or the story circle, three act structure, Save the Cat, or Hollywood's 8 sequences. Those are your 4 main plot structures. And if you want to learn more about those plot structures, you can certainly do that. You can certainly go in, just type into Google 3 act structure, and you're going to get all different kinds of variations on each plot structure or ways to diagram them, plot them out, whatever. But I will be doing a stream at the end of next month that is all just about plot, right? So 2 also important definitions I just wanted to share with you guys so you're aware is a plot device. What is a plot device and what is a plot hole? These are 2 terms that I always see when people are discussing plot that they don't seem to understand the actual definition of. So first one's easy. A plot device is anything that moves the story forward. So it is any component that is thrown into a story for the sole purpose of pushing the story to the next event or the next beat, to whatever, to the next sequence, whatever it is, right? A common variation of the plot, a common type of plot device, is the MacGuffin, which is an item or an idea that moves the action forward but is otherwise unimportant, right? So a MacGuffin is, give you a good example, I think a good classic example of the MacGuffin would be the suitcase in Pulp Fiction is a MacGuffin. People are trying to get this suitcase. This suitcase is a big deal. Only in terms of the plot. The suitcase doesn't actually end up doing anything in the story. We don't even find out what's in the suitcase. It's an enigma. We don't even know because it's not really actually important what's in the suitcase. The idea is just that the suitcase is what is making a lot of these characters fight each other and kill each other and chase each other and hunt each other down. A red herring is another type of plot device. An idea or an item or an idea in the story that purposely misleads the character or the audience, right? So you see this a lot in mysteries where they'll set up a character to be the killer and you're like, oh, it's that motherfucker. It's the stepdad. I knew it. That son of a bitch. And then the ending gets there and, oh, it turns out it's the mother. The stepdad was a red herring, right? So that's something that I see a lot on Reddit. People use the word plot device and they don't know what it means. Another one is plot hole. So a good way to break this down, a plot is the events of a story. Remember, they have to have a cause and effect relationship. A hole is a hollow opening within a structured form. Okay, well, two different definitions of these two words. So what would a plot hole be? Well, if you combine those two words, the definition would be a opening in the events of a story, or a gap in the events of a story, right? So what is a plot hole? A plot hole is an unexplained gap between the pretense of one plot point and the contradicting result of another. In other words, it is a mistake made by the writer either based on logic, the rules of the story world, or in the characterization of a character. Say your protagonist has an allergic reaction to peanuts, and then later eats peanuts with no reaction. That's a plot hole. Okay, it's not the same as a continuity error. A lot of times when people say the words continuity error, they mean a technical continuity error, like somebody has on sunglasses and the camera pans away from him and pans right back 2 seconds. He has no sunglasses anywhere on him. That would be like a continuity error, a technical continuity error. A plot is like a plot hole, is like a narration continuity error. It is when you've already established this is how your world works, and then at some point in the story, you break that without any explanation whatsoever, right? Oftentimes, plot holes can be explained away with a line of dialogue or a simple action, such as the protagonist was given a miracle drug that rid him of his allergies to peanuts, right? So, again, that's a great example. Guy says, oh, I'm allergic to peanuts. You see him eating peanuts, and he doesn't have an allergic reaction. That's a plot hole because you already established the rules of the world where the main character has an allergy to peanuts. And then a character in the story asks him, like, whoa, aren't you allergic to peanuts? And he says, oh, no, I'm good. I took a miracle drug. Well, then that's not a plot hole. That's a plot is what it is, right? So, now there is different types of plot holes. We're not going to dive too deep into that. Just know you have your narrative or logical plot holes. See, this is, I guess, important to read here. This is why I even wanted to talk about it. Today, plot holes have become a catch-all term for bad storytelling. So that's where I most common see the term plot hole being used, is when somebody writes a silly, so it would be like, here's a good example. Any Fast and Furious movie. There's a scene in one of the Fast and Furious movies. I don't know even which one it is. I just turned it on one day, saw it, and I was like, I'm not watching this. But, Vin Diesel and Michelle Rodriguez are in a car. Somebody hooks the car to a crane. The crane flings the car through the air, and he turns the steering wheel right at the right time to unhook it off the crane and land safely on the ground. It's like the real world doesn't work that way. You can't do that, okay? Yeah, that crane is going to pull your car up, just rip the fucking axle right off. You're going to crash to your goddamn death. That's not how it works, right? The weight is going to, that crane swinging around likely doesn't have the momentum to catch your car and keep it swinging at a arc. It's going to be like, oh, car, boom, dead. And so that's not a logical thing to happen in the real world. But some people think that because this illogical thing happened in a story, that's a plot hole. No, that's not a fucking plot hole. In fact, that's almost well within the bounds of the plot, because this is the Fast and the Furious, and the rules of the Fast and Furious world are fucking crazy. Crazy shit happens, okay? The characters have another term, plot armor, where it doesn't matter what Vin Diesel does, he ain't gonna die, okay? He's not gonna die in the middle of one of these crazy stunts because he can't, because the plot can't allow him to, right? So this is well within the bounds of the world that they've created with their movie. Vin Diesel can do whatever he wants with the car. He can hit the brake and make that thing stand upright and fucking tap dance if that's what he wants the car to do, all right? And that's well within the realm of the Fast and Furious movies. So no, that's not a plot hole. Just because you think that's illogical, it's not a plot hole. I had somebody the other day give me another good example, The Quiet Place. Somebody once said about The Quiet Place, well, it's stupid that, it's a massive plot hole in the story that they have a farm. I said, okay, why? And he said, well, later in the movie, he brings his son to a waterfall that covers the sound, that covers up sound. So the logical thing to do would just be build a house by the waterfall, and then the creatures can never hear you and you're safe. And it's like, this is just such a wild ass fucking, I don't even know. Like, well, this isn't a plot hole, okay? This is just what you think would be the right thing for a smart person to do in a story. Just because a character in the story didn't do the thing that you think is smart is not a fucking plot hole. That's not the definition of a plot hole, bro. There's plenty of reasons why the people in that movie want to stay on a farm. Is because it's their family fucking farm. The sentimental value. They're growing their own food there, my guy. Okay, they already have a house built. You know, just because the waterfall covers the sound of people screaming doesn't mean it's going to cover the sound of you using a fucking cement mixer to pour the, you know, the cement foundation of your new fucking home, bro. You know, and what are you gonna do when you're not near the water hole? You're gonna go walk into town, drive a cement mixer to the goddamn river so you can pour your fucking foundation. And they're the, you know, the creatures, they hunt by sound. If y'all don't haven't seen this movie, you're probably completely fucking lost, and I apologize. But you know, it's not a plot. If a character does something that you think is stupid, that's not a plot hole. Okay, that's not a fucking plot hole. If the character is shown to be an intelligent character, and then they do something stupid that is not within their characterization, then that is a plot hole. That would be what constitutes a character-based plot hole. You showed a character that was incredibly extraordinarily intelligent, and they do something that no intelligent person would possibly seemingly do. That would be a plot hole, plot hole with your character. So yeah, there's different types of plot holes. We're not going to dive too deep into it. Just wanted to make a note of that and let you guys fill you guys in, so now you know what a plot hole is. So when one of your friends tells you, "Oh, it's a plot hole because they didn't do what I thought was smart," you can say, fuckhead, you're wrong. That's not a plot hole. That's just what you think they should do, and nobody gives a fuck." So anyways, we're going to jump into our second element of storytelling. We lightly covered the first one. Again, I just spent almost an hour, 40 minutes talking about plot. Fuck's sakes, almost an hour. I need to like have like an alarm here to stop me from taking too much time and going on these giant rants. Ugh. Well, it is what it is. And I still, you know, I took almost an hour to talk about plot, at least 40 minutes, and we didn't even cover the majority of what plot consists of. You know, you guys still don't know what a through line is or a plot thread. You know, we still haven't deep dive into a single plot structure. We'll do all that on the day designated exclusively just for plot. But for now, we covered it enough that you understand the concept of what a plot is, understand the idea of what plot structures are, you know what the most important plot structures are for you to know, and you know what a plot device is and a plot hole. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the second most important, by my standards, second most important element of a story, and that is character. Let me scroll. I am scrolling. Okay. Characters. Second most important part of your story. And the definition of a character is a person, place, or thing with a personality that makes decisions within your story. Okay. So I know that's kind of a kooky definition, but if you break it down, that's kind of what it is, right? A character is a person, a place, or a thing with a personality in your story. And you can think, well, how can a thing be a character? Well, the movie Cars, fuckhead. There you go. Boom. Enough said, right? So that's it. A cartoon with talking cars. Cars can be characters. You know, a bug can be a character. Obviously, the movie Bugs. A alien, a fucking whole planet can be a character. Your wall can be a character. There's actually a really good, disturbing movie called, I think it's called Deep Dark, about a hole in the wall that actually has a personality and talks to people. The hole in the wall is a character. It's a character, and it's one of the main characters of that story. And it's a pretty fucked up one. But characters are important to a story. Let's see what I wrote here, and if I still agree with what I wrote 7 years ago. So, complex and relatable characters are important to a good story. Your audience should feel different levels of closeness to different characters, depending on if they're your main, secondary, or background characters. Depending on the nature of the story, characters are most often people or animals. Writers use characters to perform the actions and speak the dialogue in a story. They move a story's plot forward. They are the who of a story. The central characters are those that are vital to the development of the story. The plot revolves around them. So this is actually the reason why characters is the second most important aspect of a story, because they are what drives the plot. The main characters or the protagonist's decisions should be what drives the plot. The plot is the series of events that have that cause and effect relationship. Well, what events are those? They're based off of the decisions in the act that the main character makes and the actions that he takes. The decisions that he or she the main character makes a decision, takes action. That action has a consequence, which leads to the next event in a story, right? So characters very closely relate to your plot. If you don't have characters that are proactive in making decisions and taking action within a story, you don't have a plot, right? So let's see if that lines up with what they say a character is. A character is a person, animal, being, creature, or a thing in a story. Writers use characters to perform the actions and speak dialogue, moving the story along a plot line. I mean, that sounds very close to what I wrote, right? And I wrote that 7 years ago. So this ain't like some copy paste shit, right? A story can have only one character, a protagonist, and still be a complete story. The character's conflict may be an inner one, the conflict with his or herself. Okay, that's getting into conflict. We don't need to read about that. Examples of character: a popular television series that just ended is the show Glee. I think my girlfriend likes the show Glee. I've never watched it, but anyways, each season had popular characters who had to learn to work together to create a good musical production. Various characters underwent a change, making them dynamic characters, such as Noah Puckerman. He appears to carry out the stereotype of a jock, strong but not so smart, but his character changes as it's revealed that he can be hardworking and intelligent. So I guess there's a good idea of a character. So we're going to dive into types of characters because this is an important aspect to note. Character types. So the first, you can break this down into different ways of looking here. We're going to move over to theirs because it's a little bit structured a little better. So you have two different types of characters, major characters and minor characters. Major characters are going to be the important characters within a story. The story is going to revolve around them. You can think of it as the important characters in a story are the characters that are making decisions that drive the plot. And there's two main types of major characters. Those are protagonist and antagonist. The protagonist is the main character which the story revolves. The decisions made by this character will be affected by a conflict from within or externally through another character, yada, yada, yada. And then the foil of that or the opposite is the antagonist. This character or group of characters causes the conflict for the protagonist. So those are really the most important things to remember about a protagonist and an antagonist. Again, the protagonist is a word that a lot of people use incorrectly. All a protagonist is the main character of a story around which the story revolves. That is the character their story revolves around the character because it is the character that is making the decisions that push the plot forward, right? Okay, so and the antagonist is just the character that causes conflict for the protagonist. That's it. That's all it has to be. Okay, the difference is it's not good and bad. That's the main point to make. The protagonist does not mean good guy and antagonist mean bad guy. Protagonist means the main character of the story of which the story revolves, meaning she is the one making decisions that push the story forward. And the antagonist, who attempts to stop the protagonist, brings conflict, it creates conflict for the protagonist, usually by attempting to stop them from getting what they want, right? So those are your two major characters. That's an important aspect to note about characters when discussing characters in a film, because you'll run into a whole lot of different conversations with people that don't understand what a protagonist is. There's a common conversation out that's been happening for years that I've seen on the internet saying Thanos was the protagonist of what was that last Aviators movie? See, this is why I need more people watching the stream so y'all can tell me what the fuck I'm supposed to when I blank on this shit. I smoked way too much weed in my youth and now it's basically just a fog cloud up there where all these words just kind of fuzz around. Thank you, Cutie Pie. Avengers Endgame. Avengers Endgame. No, you got it right, Cutie Pie. I appreciate you. Good looking out, hot stuff. Avengers Endgame. The villain Thanos was the protagonist, is what a lot of people say. And that could be possible. I don't actually know. I've never actually watched the movie. I've seen the movie dozens of times, but it's been a long time. I watched it when it came out, watched it a lot when it came out, kind of got sick of it and didn't want to watch it anymore. It's a great movie, but I never watched it to decide for myself with that idea in mind. It was after I watched it, I heard this conversation happening. I was like, well, I mean, it could be. It's an interesting concept. It is possible, though. it is possible Thanos is the protagonist of that story if the story revolves around him, which, from what I remember about the story, I don't think the story revolves entirely around Thanos. I believe the story revolves around numerous characters, and at that point, you would have more or less, you would have leads in the story, but you would have multiple main characters, really, right? Because there's such massive components of the story that revolve around Tony Stark, that revolve around Thor, that revolve around Thanos. You could say that, yeah, it is Thanos that kicks it all off, right? All of the other characters in the story are virtually just reacting to what Thanos is doing, but that isn't necessary to be a protagonist. It doesn't say the character that kicks the story off. That's not the protagonist. No, there's a lot of movies in which the antagonist appears and starts shit for the protagonist. I mean, most stories, that's usually the inciting event of a story. The event that gets a story's plot moving. You usually, a lot of times, it's a protagonist. Think Independence Day. Or better yet, think Matrix. Everybody's seen that one. Neo is just a regular Joe Blow until Mr. Smith jumps into his life, the antagonist, and fucks things up for him. And then he has choices to make. His story starts. He's reluctant. He doesn't, but he has to go on his adventure. Now he is his call. That was his call to action. The bad guy showed up and fucked things up for him, and he had to react to what the bad guy was doing. That's in so many different stories. Just because Thanos takes the actions that every other character has to spend the rest of the movie reacting to does not mean he is the main character of the story. Okay, it doesn't mean he's the main character story because he's the first character we see, which isn't entirely true. I believe Thor is the first character we see. He's all tied up though and beaten up, and Thanos, has his ass kicked. But just because even if he was the first character you see on screen, that's not the protagonist. It's just very common. A lot of people say that. Well, it's the first character you see in the story, and that's the protagonist. No, it's not. No, it's not. That is common for the protagonist to be the first character you're introduced to, but that's not always the case, So that's not entirely true either. Either way, protagonist is a main character around which the story revolves because they are the ones making the decisions that push the action. So in terms of like the Avengers, you can think of multiple characters that would be main characters, right? Because there's so many characters that are making decisions that push the plot forward, including Thanos. But yeah, Thanos, the way that people say it is Thanos is not causing conflict for the Avengers. Thanos just wants to right the universe, and the Avengers are the one that are causing him conflict because they're trying to stop him. And that's an interesting way to look at it. It is. That's from that standpoint, like I said, hey, it could be Thanos might be the protagonist. I haven't really deep dived into it to see what I actually think. My opinion on it is unclear at the moment, but it is possible. Just going to show the difference between protagonist and antagonist, right? So there's your major characters, protagonists and antagonists. Then you're going to have minor characters, okay? And minor characters are all other characters in the story. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. Another way to say this would be primary characters and secondary characters. I think that's the way that I have it illustrated in my notes. My notes, main characters and supporting characters is what I have. They have minor characters and major characters. I've heard primary characters and secondary characters. There's different ways of saying that, but more or less that's what those characters are, right? So major characters are going to be your protagonist and your antagonist. The characters that the story revolves around. Minor characters are going to be all other characters, right? In the story. So not as important, but the major characters, they can still play a serious part. So like, Samwise Gamgee from Lord of the Rings. I don't know why he just popped in my head, but he did. He's a secondary character. He's not a main character. He still makes decisions that drive certain components in the story, but not nearly as much as Frodo. And he's still an important character. Gandalf is a secondary character, still an incredibly important character. So secondary characters or minor characters can still be very important. Think of it as this would be the person that would be nominated for a supporting role versus a lead role. Right. Another way to say that, lead actors and supporting actors, lead characters, supporting characters. You can further break down characters. There's another list of different ways to break them down. So you also have static characters and dynamic characters, right? Let's go back to my notes, see how well I have this. So 2 different types of characters. A static character is a character who does not change during the course of a story, and the opposite of that would be a dynamic character, a character who changes as a result of the events of the story, right? So let's see if that matches what these folks say over Meow. Let's see. Static characters who are static do not change throughout the story. Their use may simply be to create or relieve tension, or they were not meant to change. A major character can remain static through the whole story. That's a good point to make. This isn't dynamic does not mean major, and static does not mean minor. Minor characters, again, like Samwise Gamgee, Gandalf changes through the Lord of the Rings, so he would be a dynamic character. Dynamic characters change throughout the story. They may learn a lesson, become bad, or change in complex ways. A lot of times, yeah, it can be an interchange. Their character changes. Gandalf changes. I believe he goes from Gandalf the Grey to Gandalf the White after he dies, I believe, right? That would be a change. That's a major change in his character. Frodo's character changes. Frodo goes from being a bit of a pussball to being, a little bit more of a badass. Learns very valuable lessons throughout the story. And same with Samwise Gamgee, right? Samwise Gamgee goes from being too afraid to talk to his chubby little girl that he's, smitten with back in Hobbitville or whatever. And when he gets back, he's, yeah, the guy's, fought with multiple giant monsters. He kicked the shit out of a giant spider. He ain't afraid to ask a girl out now. Next time we see him, he's got a bunch of little hobbit kids and shit. Changed person, right? So think of it like that. Dynamic characters change. They can change in all kinds of different ways, but that's what a dynamic character is. I would say that for the most part, it is, in my opinion, this isn't a fact, it's just in my opinion, you do want your main characters to be dynamic most of the time. They don't have to be, but usually you would want them to be dynamic, unless it is important to the story that they remain the same. If you just write a story and you didn't think about it and turns out your character didn't change, chances are it's a shit character or a shit story. So you always want to have that in mind. If you don't want your main character to change, they don't have to, but you want to have a good reason for why they're not changing. Okay. And then there's two other types of characters I want to talk about. Those are flat characters and round characters. Again, two different opposites. Okay. So a flat character, an uncomplicated character in a story who is illustrated by very few traits. A flat character is opposite of a round character. It is a one-dimensional character, is another word for this. Flat means one-dimensional. Although such characters are important, they tend to remain static in their temperaments and personalities throughout the story. So flat does not mean the same as static. Static means they don't change. Flat means they are one-dimensional. Very few character traits, don't have a lot going on. We can pull up a slide of the different character dimensions too, because that is an important thing to know. And I don't actually think I even have that in my notes. I don't. What a bummer is that? Yeah. Okay. Anyways, I need to add that anyway, so we might as well pull up a web page on it. Flat characters are the opposite of round characters. So what is a round character? A character whose story is complex, or backstory is complex, dynamic, and maybe even contradictory. A round character is the opposite of a flat character. A round character's personality, background, motives, and other features are fully delineated by the author to create a fully developed personality. So, flat character equals one-dimensional character, and a round character would be more of a three-dimensional. Let's do one-dimensional characters. 1, 2, 3-dimensional characters. Oh, this is a forum. I do enjoy reading what other people have to say about in forums, but generally, we just want to find a really quick, here we go, really quick article just illustrating it for us, right? And I fucked it up again. This is another forum. Reddit is definitely not going to be Blogspot. There we go. Okay, 1, 2, and 3-dimensional characters. So just to give you a rough idea, a one-dimensional character constitutes the walks-on parts of the story. The walk-on parts of the story. These are, so I don't know what that entirely means, but your one-dimensional characters are going to be limited to basically just a face and no name. So these will be your waiters, your cab drivers, bartenders, a mother walking down the street, a random pikeman your hero stabs through the face. They they are briefly seen and do not speak. One-dimensional characters that spend more than several pages in your story should be made two-dimensional. Okay, so That's giving us a little writing advice. I am going to save this though, because this is something I've been needing to put in my own notes for a long time. So this will be a good time to do that. See, I'm definitely learning right along with you guys, which is kind of the fun part of this. Doing all this research kind of sharpens my chops a little bit too, having to think about these kind of things and explain them to people, right? So a two-dimensional character is the same as a one-dimensional character, except for the fact that they show one emotion or character trait. So they're also known as cardboard characters. Yeah. So one-dimensional characters would be they just show once. They don't have a name, don't have a face, don't even have a personality a lot of times. Two-dimensional characters show up briefly, but generally they lack characteristics, they lack dimensions. They only have one personality. They only have maybe one motive, one motivation, one emotion that they show. There isn't a complexity of varying emotions, various motives, varying personalities, or a variety of character traits, right? Three-dimensional character plays an important role in the story and constitutes all major characters, including villains. They have complex emotions and sometimes conflicting motives, troubled pasts, and deep worries. They are alive with passion, ambition, and desire, never apathetic, and if they are overly apathetic. I don't know if you need to make them overly apathetic, but that's a good basic rundown. Going back into characters here, you can think of static characters, or excuse me, flat characters, as being your one and two dimensional characters. All one and two dimensional characters are going to be flat. They're going to have, again, a flat character. This is their definition now. A flat character has one or two main traits, usually only all positive or negative. Okay, so one or two main traits, that's it. That would be your two-dimensional characters. One-dimensional characters would have pretty much no traits. They're just there because you need a waiter in this story, right? Round characters would be your three-dimensional. These are the opposites of flat characters. These characters have many different traits, good and bad, making them more interesting and more complex too. So again, you want your major characters to be rounds. You traditionally want them to be round, and you want them to be dynamic. When you're writing a major character or a primary character or a main character, you want them to be round. You want them to be dynamic. The rest, the same with the antagonist. The antagonist of your story, protagonist and antagonist, they both need to be round, or should be round and should be dynamic. That's important. The important point to take away from all that, right? Stock characters. So these are stereotypical characters such as the boy genius, ambitious career person, faithful sidekick. I've never heard the term stock characters. A foil. A foil is a character that has opposite character traits from another, meant to help highlight or bring out another's positive or negative side. Many times the antagonist is the foil for the protagonist. Doesn't always have to be. The foil doesn't have to be the antagonist and vice versa. It's just a character. Like if you have a foil for your main character, it would just be another character in the story that has the complete opposite personality and traits. That's a foil, right? So kind of important to note. Let's see. I think as far as character goes, you got a good base rundown. So we spent close to about 10-20 minutes talking about it. There was something in here I thought. Let's just read why they say characters are so important. Then I'll give you my 2 cents and then we can move on. All right. So characters are what make stories. Without a character, there is no story to tell, only a lot of scenery. Many characters in literature, television series, and movies have a huge impact on people. Some people like to live their lives through these characters who appear to have more exciting lives. Also, these characters may seem so real and inspirational that people forget that they are fictional. Characters become so important to the audience that cities across the world hold conventions in which people pay a lot of money to dress and act as their favorite character. So this is kind of like actually giving us a rundown of why people say they're important. I was hoping it would give us an idea of why they're important as far as the story goes, right? But, characters are important in your story. Having good characters that people can relate to are very important in the story. Here's your protagonist and antagonist. Let's see, character development. Yeah, having character development is good, but getting into the need, characters want, need, and flaw. These are important aspects of writing a protagonist. When you write a protagonist, you're going to make sure the protagonist has a want, the protagonist want, the protagonist need, and the protagonist's flaw. Those are 3 characteristics of a protagonist that you always want to make sure you have. But we'll dive into that a little bit more when we cover protagonists or cover characters on Character Day. I got a whole bunch of stuff here. There we go, setting. The last thing I want to talk about was character archetypes before we dive into that. character archetypes. So what is a character archetype? So we've gone over character types, right? That would be static versus dynamic, flat versus rounds, protagonist versus antagonist, main character versus supporting character. Those would be your main breakdown of character types. But then there is a thing called character archetypes. What is a character archetype? A character archetype is a reoccurring stock character, there's that word stock, that represents something universal in our human experience. They're immediately recognizable within novels, films, and other narrative media as fitting a predetermined pattern. Even if certain details like names and physical attributes change, writers can use familiar patterns to engage with readers in a comfortable and relatable way. I got heartburn. I got so excited about character archetypes. My heart went a little crazy. Ugh. Ooh. I was kicking my ass, man. Okay. I didn't think I was going to make it out of that paragraph. I thought I was going to die before I got reading out of that blue bubble. I felt like I was lit on fire on the inside. So, a character archetype, you can kind of think of it as tropes for characters. A little bit. Tropes are something slightly different. They don't necessarily apply to characters per se, but that would be what a trope was if it did apply to a character. A trope would be, or a character archetype would be a character trope. Like the one that we saw in the last article used the word stock characters. They use it here. Stock character, says it right there. A stock character is a character archetype. And they had one like the boy genius, the faithful sidekick, right? There's tons of them. In fact, character archetypes are important. A lot of people don't particularly like character archetypes and stereotypes. Why use character archetypes in writing? So here we go. There's 6 classic character archetypes. Character archetypes are important because they offer it is, what's the word that I'm looking for? It represents something that I guess, well, like they said earlier, it is universal to the human experience. These archetypes represent a type of person that a lot of us actually do come into contact with in a daily life. Usually in a movie or a story, that person's, archetype is going to be blown out of proportion for the sake of entertainment. But we do know people that fill these roles in our society. We may ourselves think of ourselves as filling these roles in society. And the fact that these are so recognizable brings a sense of familiarity into each story. Do you need to use character archetypes in a story? No, you don't. Can you? Absolutely. It's a good idea to, at least, if you are a writer or you're making movies, it's at least a good idea to practice using character archetypes, right? Knowing how to take a character archetype is and write a good quality version of it is really important. Think of like an anti-hero. An anti-hero is a kind of archetype, right? If you don't know how to write heroes, you're going to have a hard time writing an anti-hero. And the reality is it's almost impossible in sometimes to write a character that isn't some kind of archetype. It's not entirely impossible, but if you think about like your favorite characters, most of them probably fall into an archetype. And it doesn't mean that the writer specifically set out to personify that archetype with a character, to characterize that archetype. It was just that this is that type of character. They made a character. The main character of the story was a hero because that's the story they wanted to write, and that character falls in the hero archetype. A very good book for archetypes, I'll add it to the YouTube video link somewhere in the description, is The Hero with 1,000 Faces by, is it John Campbell, I think his name is. I have it here on my phone. I don't have it on my computer, but I have it in my Audible. Almost said my Ableton. I haven't been in Ableton in years. So audio software. Let's see. Wow, I have read so many books. It's kind of nice to throw open my Audible and just see how many books I've read and feel smart for a second, like I'm not a complete fucking idiot. The Hero with 1,000 Faces by Joseph Campbell is a really good book. Joseph Campbell writes really amazing books that are very helpful to writers for understanding things like the hero's journey. That's Joseph Campbell has a whole book on that. And then for character archetypes, the book A Hero with 1,000 Faces is very important for understanding character archetypes. So every single one of these classic character archetypes would come is written down and explored in that Hero with a Thousand Faces. So that's a really good book. I wouldn't be surprised if at some point they even note it somewhere in this. We're not going to read all of the paragraphs to each one. I'm just going to run through them. But your 6 classic character archetypes, you'll all be able to pick these out. You can think of a character off the top of your head that fits one, right? The hero, Neo from the Matrix, right? The shadow, a dark reflection of the hero. That'd be kind of like a foil for the hero, right? A good one there that, oh, see, they put Gollum, or that's what I was thinking. Mr. Hyde and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Mr. Hyde would be the shadow of Dr. Jekyll, right? Another interesting one is Jenny from Forrest Gump. Jenny is the foil for Forrest. So a lot of people miss out on that, particularly if they haven't read the book Forrest Gump. But if you've read the book Forrest Gump, then you know when you watch the movie, Jenny is the foil for Forrest. Everything Forrest does right, Jenny does wrong. And it's because they are more or less polar opposites of each other, right? Which is a very important aspect to understanding that story. A lot of people, there's this whole thing nowadays online where Jenny is the main villain and she's a horrible person. And it's like, well, she definitely does some very mean things to Forrest, and no, she's not a good person. That's a point of her character. She's the opposite of Forrest Gump, and he is a good person. So she's not, but she's not an antagonist. She's not a bad character. She's just his foil. She's the opposite of him. And when you understand that, the movie itself makes you feel sad for Jenny. Instead of feeling angry at the way Jenny treats Forrest, you feel very sad for her. You know, that's kind of what her character was meant to, the emotion that it was meant to convey was more like you feel sorry for her. You know, but you wouldn't get that if you didn't realize that she was meant to be his shadow, right? So another reason why it's important to kind of understand character archetypes, it helps you try to understand what the writer meant by what by their narrative, why this character acts a certain way, why this, that, or the other thing. A lot of it can be explained by character archetypes, right? The sidekick, Samwise Gamgee, right? Ron Weasley from Harry Potter, there you go, is right there. The villain archetype, of course, that's, pick one, the Joker is going to be a big one. Professor Moriarty from Sherlock Holmes is what they got down there. Villain's pretty self-explanatory, pretty easy, right? Thanos would be the villain. Whether he's the protagonist or the antagonist, it doesn't matter. Remember, an antagonist is not a villain. The antagonist is just the person that creates conflict for the protagonist. So Thanos could be the protagonist or the antagonist and still be the villain of the story, but he would be the villain of the story. The lover, pick any, romance movie. You're going to have the lover in there, right? Then this is Pippin from Lord of the Rings. Huh. Interesting. Okay, I would have not have picked that example, but there you go. It's there. Okay. The Mentor. That's going to be, there's so many of those movies. There's so many mentors in all the movies. It's any character that brings the main character under their wing to teach them something that's going to help them later on in the story. So Morpheus would be the mentor in Matrix, right? The Mother, I don't know what that one is. The Mother archetype represents a supportive, nurturing presence in the hero's life. So Aunt May and Spider-Man. Okay, that's cool. The Everyman character is a projection of the reader. Interesting. Dr. Watson from Sherlock Holmes. Okay. Arthur Dent from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Okay, cool. So yeah, it's a character that is meant to represent you, the audience. That's interesting. Haven't heard that one before. The damsel, right? Damsel in distress. That's let's see, Alice from Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. Tiny Tim from Dickens' A Christmas Carol. Oh, there you go. Interesting. See, they're not gendered either. But this character can take many forms of any age and any gender. There you go. The second line right there. But yeah, there's tons of your classical damsels in distress in all kinds of movies. I'm sure I can't think of one at the moment, but saving any princess that needed to be saved from a castle from a dragon, that's your damsel, right? The Trickster, the most enduring character archetype, even more so than heroes. Interesting. Most popular modern archetypes, the hero. So the anti-hero are usually a trickster who rather begrudgingly has become invested in something more than just their own survival. Examples of famous tricksters in literature include Puck from A Midsummer's Night Dream, the Weasley twins from the Harry Potter, and Loki from Norse mythology. So, yeah, just a trickster that likes to play tricks. You know, the best example I can think of is there's a TV show called Supernatural that has a character in there named the Trickster. He's a god that just likes to play tricks and fuck with people. And yeah, he's entirely 100% invested in just him having fun and getting away and being surviving whatever is happening in the story, right? So the Guardian, someone who stands at a threshold holding the hero back from continuing on their journey. Guardians are usually quite single-minded and fixated on their goal of keeping two worlds, people, or experiences separated. So that would be like the gatekeeper to the Emerald City in the Wizard of Oz. Oh, or three-headed dog Fluffy from the Harry Potter series. Interesting. Okay, the Herald. The Herald is a character that foretells great change, usually near the beginning of the story. So a good example of that, if you've ever seen the scary movie Cabin in the Woods, they literally have a character named the Herald who does exactly this, tells the kids, you're all gonna fucking die, you know, as they're going to the cabin, right? And they literally make a meta joke out of that, right? The scapegoat is an archetype, is someone who takes the blame for another's misdeeds. That could have probably told you that. It's pretty self-explanatory. Snowball from the Animal Farm, if you've ever read that. If you haven't, you should definitely go check that book out. That's Orwell right there, really good book. The Outlaws, their key strengths are their independence and the sense of self that keeps them from bending to societal constraints. So that would be, I don't know either of those two. Major archetype in both the Adventures of Robin Hood and the original Spider-Man's comics. Oh, okay, well there you go. Oh. That would be the Sheriff of Nottingham and J. Jonah Jameson, the Paperman. Okay, and then the rebel archetype epitomizes chaotic good. They have a cause and they are not afraid to burn a few bridges or cities in its name. The rebel sees something deeply wrong in their society and takes it upon themselves to change it because nobody else is going to. That would be Katniss Everdeen from the Hunger Games, if you're a fan of that. Atticus Finch in To Kill a Mockingbird. The last is the ruler. The ruler is a natural leader in a position of power, such as a monarchy, a government office, or the head of a powerful company. Let's see, that would be Miranda Priestley in The Devil Wears Prada, or King Uther from the Arthurian Legends. I don't know that one. Do know The Devil Wears Prada, though. Okay, so there's what a character archetype is. I hope that kind of explains that. And there's a lot of them. I'm not going to go over this article because we don't have the time, but I definitely wanted to just show you guys this. 201 character archetypes writers must have in their armory. So there's 201 of these fuckers, according to industrialscripts.com, that every screenwriter knows, or every screenwriter should know, right? So we have, geez, everything from the absent father, the believer, a character with a strong spiritual, ethical, or supernatural belief. Look at all these just in C. Creepy twins is an archetype. See, like I told you, they're kind of character tropes, right? Creepy twins is somewhat of a trope in horror movies. Crazy cat lady, right there, is an archetype. So, all you crazy cat ladies out there, you're killing it. She has enough cats, but don't bother trying to tell her that. Often lonely and unhinged. Okay, well, that's a bummer. So, anyways, tons and tons and tons of character archetypes, 201, according to these people. So there's character. That's the basic rundown of, you know, at least so you can get a general understanding of what a character is in terms of elements of a story, why the character is so important to a story, what it does to help the story move along. You guys have just a basic rundown of how you can split character in the most basic categories: main versus supporting, flat versus rounds, static versus dynamic, right? Protagonist and antagonist, and then you know about your character archetypes. We didn't dive into need, want, and flaw just yet for the protagonist. We'll get to that on a later date. But you have a general idea of what characters are, why they're important, and different ways to analyze them, right, in a story. So now we're going to move on to setting. So I'm going to give you my quick rundown of setting, just my definition, and then give you my 5 elements of setting. And then we're going to dive into what other people have to say about it, because I've actually read some stuff in the course of my research that I don't have the full scope, I guess. When I read about setting and learned about setting, I didn't learn about the full scope of what setting entails. So it's kind of interesting to hear other people's opinions on it when I was doing a little bit of my research. But so this is what I wrote. For some stories, the setting is very important, while for others, it is not. When examining how setting contributes to a story, there are multiple aspects to consider. The definition of a story, the time, place, and conditions in which the actions of a story takes place and which establishes the story's context. Time, place, and conditions in which a story takes place. That's your setting. I wrote down that there are 5 elements of setting. That's the geographic location or place, which is the where a story takes place. The time frame of the story or time, which includes historical period, time of day, year, etc. That's the when of the setting. The weather during the course of the story, pretty self-explanatory. Atmosphere is the mood created by all the other elements of the setting. And the social climate, which is the day-to-day life and social conditions that the characters reside in. So 5 elements of setting, or 5 important things to consider when you're writing down your setting, is the place, the time, the weather, the atmosphere, and the social climate. And that's actually all I have written down for settings. So, suffice it to say, maybe my stories have really shitty settings. I don't know. But let's go ahead and watch this video. This is a video I found. I don't know how good it is, so I'm going to go through it, and if it sucks, then you're going to suffer with me. It's made by a YouTuber named Flocabulary, though. They have a pretty decent-sized channel, over 200,000 subscribers. This is a rap, educational rap, on the importance of setting in a story. So I did watch a few minutes of it, and I thought it was kind of, shit. That's a bummer. This is going to freeze again. I'm going to have to figure that out. That has something to do with my drivers, I'm positive. It happens whenever for some reason it always happens when I full screen a video in my computer. I end up getting it ends up freezing. But it doesn't take me very long to reload it, so we're just going to let it do its thing. This will take all of 5-10 seconds, hopefully. It did last time. Last time it didn't take all that long. So, right here. Yep, do its thing. Okay. Restore.
Booking.com has all kinds of stays. For those who love family resorts.
Let me just skip that, stop that, check my stream. Yep, we're still here. That's good. You guys are probably getting a mirror effect there. There we go. Okay. So, minimize that. And let's go ahead and check this out. So this is a rap on the importance of setting in a story.
Where are we? Huh? I'm sitting, leaning, living, breathing, thinking about the book that I finished reading. I dug the characters and liked the plot. Was anything else important? Probably not. Wait, what about the setting? The setting is the one I'm always forgetting. It gives us the where and the when, but it's mostly in the background. Know what I'm saying? Feel me? Actually, maybe not. The setting might be more important than I thought. Here's the character, his name is Todd, and here's some action that's a part of the plot. Todd clenched his jaw, he was sweating. Now how could that be informed by the setting? Well, let's say he's on the track at a race, you'd infer he's running, trying for first place. But what if we switch up the setting? There might be a different reason Todd is sweating. Say he's in class, sitting at a desk, you might infer schoolwork's causing him stress. Or what if he was on a ship going down? Fear is the reason he's sweating now. Yup, setting can reveal conflicts and plots, plus it provides context. I'm betting, you know where and when.
All right. I do have to say that, not the biggest fan of the rhymes here, but that beat is fucking ballin'. I do love that beat. If I could just get a recording of that beat, like, I could chill to that. I could smoke some weed to that.
You know where and when is the setting, the mood and themes that we're getting, and and the plot the author is telling are informed by the setting. I'm betting, you know where and when is the setting, the mood and themes that we're getting, and the plot the author is telling are informed by the setting. The setting can inform the mood and the theme like a score adds a feeling to a movie scene. If the setting is a cliffside drive with a nice new ride under bright blue skies, the theme might be exploration or freedom, and there's already a mood I'm feeling, a mood of hopefulness and excitement from the setting the author's writing. Good authors choose settings with care. They don't pick a random place and put their story there. Like when Odysseus is trapped in the cave with a cyclops who wants to eat him up right away. Why did the author choose a cave? He wanted Odysseus to be trapped, okay? He could have chosen a locked room, but a cave's gloom sets a darker mood. And it allows Odysseus to hide in the dark until he blinds the cyclops and then sneaks off. The setting of the cave was key to the plot and conflict, the mood and themes. So the next time you read a book, at the setting is where you need to look. And when you write, choose the setting with care. Think mood, theme, and plot, and not just where. I'm betting, you know where and when is the setting, the mood and themes that we're getting, and the plot the author is telling are informed by the setting. I'm betting, you know where and when is the setting, the mood and themes that we're getting, and the plot the author is telling are informed by the setting. A story needs a setting like the summer needs heat, like yards need feet, EDM need a beat, like a butcher needs meat, and a dentist needs teeth, like wool needs a sheep, like a prez needs a beat, like a lock needs a key, like a bird needs a beak, like a day needs a week, like a curse needs a bleep on TV, a repeat needs a repeat, a repeat needs a repeat, a repeat needs a repeat.
I'm giving that a thumbs up. All right. I did like the vocals on the chorus. I used to work in recording studios and I recorded hip hop for 8-9 years. I did like the vocals on this. So I'm listening to it, and of course the first thing that's popping in my head is not I'm listening to all the production elements of it, and I did like the vocals on that chorus, right? That was good, but the lyrics can't be too fast or too crazy because they're trying to teach you something here, but so I'm giving them a thumbs up. It was good. So anyways, hope you were listening there and learned something about that. I did like the graphics too. Out of my face, son. But we're going to go ahead and do the more boring thing, and we're going to read a little bit about it now too. In case you're not a very audible listener, right? Or audible learner, you don't learn from listening to shit, then we'll go ahead and we'll read about it instead. So let's go ahead and read. What is a setting? What is a setting? Most people think a setting is simply where a part of your story takes place. This is only partially correct, but it does give a good start. More accurately, setting is where the action in your story takes place. But the where is a lot more complex than you might think. It isn't just the geography of the scene. Remember, I said earlier, it is 5 elements that make up a setting. It is your place, your time, your weather, your atmosphere, and your social climate. But they are saying the setting includes landscape and location, climate and weather, politics and religion. I think that's covered by social climate, right? Time of day, time and history, that's all covered by time. Societal norms, rules, and laws, that's all covered by social climate. Speech, languages, and communication styles. Again, I feel like that's social climate. Flora and fauna be part of the geography. Magic and technology. Honestly, the list could go on. What I want to impress upon you is how much goes into a setting. So, yeah, that's here. What is this again? Is this where? Oh yeah, okay. So yeah, that's who is this? Dabblewriter.com. So dabblewriter.com gave you a good solid list of a whole bunch of things that can go into your setting. Your setting is as complicated as you want to make it, really. As complicated, essentially, I always just say it only needs to be as deep as it needs to be, right? Especially when you're writing. Writing's a little different than a movie. When you're watching a movie, obviously the setting, you're creating it visually, and it's a little bit more important because the audience is directly seeing it versus in a book where the audience is imagining it. And how much of the setting you describe could either, you should only ever describe in a book when you're writing, to any of those people out there who are writers. It's not like a movie. In a book, you really only ever want to describe what is necessary. That's it. You don't want to describe anything unnecessary in a book. Anything that's unnecessary, cut it out. You don't need it. In a lot of cases, it would be more beneficial for your audience to visualize the setting however they want. Only give them enough to visualize the setting for themselves, right? And then give them the important aspects of the setting, like the social climate. If the time is, in the 1800s, it's important for you to note that in your story. If there's a particular political religion that is alive in the time frame that the story revolves around, that's important. If you go on in your story to talk about how, oh, there's an important religion that happens in my magical kingdom, and then you never mention that religion ever again, then take that shit out. That's not an important aspect of the setting. So yeah, setting can describe all these things. Again, I do think that these things were actually accounted for in my 5 elements, right? The climate, weather, time of day, time and history, all kind of included under that one heading of time. Societal norms, politics and religion, all kind of included in the social climate. And you only want to put the aspects that are most important to a story, right? But when you're watching a movie, instead of writing a story, watching a movie, there is a lot that you can gather from the setting, and you'll be able to tell. A lot of people don't think of it in terms of, was the setting for the movie good? That's a question I never see anybody have conversations about on all the subreddits that I'm on that discuss movies. Okay Buddy Cinephile, Movie Critic, there's, you name it, I'm on, movies, film, whatever. There's tons of subreddits for that where people just talk about movies all day long. And for all of those, I can't think of a single time anybody has jumped into those forums and asked, was the setting to this movie good? People ask, did you think this acting was good? Were the special effects good? What did you think of the plot? What did you think of the characters? What did you think of this, that, or the other thing? Very rarely do you hear people ask, like, was the setting good? That's kind of an odd question to be heard ask, but, it is an important question to ask in a movie. When you're watching a movie, if the setting that the movie's taking place in doesn't gel with the actual movie itself, right? Like the movie is supposed to be taking place, you're trying to make a movie about a hunter going out and hunting a big giant animal, and this is taking place in New York City. That's kind of an odd setting. I could see how that could potentially work in a story, right? Like somebody from the country, a big hunter, goes to hunt big game in the city, and by big game he means like some giant sewer gator or some shit. Like you can make a story out of that. But if your hunter is going to hunt a big elk, and then you put his ass in New York, and that's the setting of the story, that's a weird setting to put this fucking story in. So that is an interesting question to give yourself when you're watching movies from time to time. Just kind of make a note, like, is the setting fit where we're at in the story, right? Is everything that's happening in this scene, should it be happening in the setting of this scene, or is there a different setting that they could possibly put this action in that would give it another meaning, right? That's always an important thing to note, is how does the setting of a story inform the reader of what is happening, or inform the viewer of what is happening, right? We kind of went over this in that rap. I just recently, a while back, wrote a story about a guy having a party in his house, and it's important to note that this guy is pretty wealthy. But instead of just coming out and just telling the reader, oh, this guy's wealthy, which is kind of boring, I describe his apartment. And it's, a very nice apartment with vaulted ceilings. It's like penthouse suites, got big giant windows, a giant piano on marble granite floors all throughout the apartment. And so I'm trying to create this visualization of a very, very nice apartment complex. And that informs the reader that, oh, this guy must have some kind of money. He at least lives in a luxury apartment. And I can do that without telling the reader that he's wealthy. And you can do the same in movies too. You think of a movie where, when you go to Dracula's castle, Nosferatu, when me and my girlfriend just recently watched that movie. When he goes to the castle, freaky shit's about to happen, because look at the fucking castle. That shit is like spooky ass shit, man. It's like a fucking spooky nightmare of a castle, and that Nosferatu, the motherfucker that lives here, is some scary ass motherfucker. He's not going to open the door and look like Brad Pitt, because look at the castle, right? So it does inform the reader and give the reader a certain expectation. The viewer, in this case, in a movie, gives the viewer a certain expectation. And I imagine that's kind of why they'll say, why is setting important? Helps bring your story to life. Puts the scene in context. That's kind of where we're talking about there with the castle. Immerse readers are emotional readers. Yeah, a good setting will make the story immersive. Provides opportunities for character development. Interesting. That's an interesting one. What makes a good setting? This is all kind of stuff, tips for good setting. This is all stuff we're going to get into when I do my live stream exclusively on setting. This was another web page that I just wanted to go to real quick, which was, this was just a way that a teacher would teach their students about setting. And I thought that it had some interesting things to say, some points to make. So they go over their 4 characteristics of a setting. So the first one is physical setting. Let's see, there it is. Yeah, physical setting. The physical setting is the most common type of setting that students will be familiar with. Oh, excuse me. So yeah, this is 4 types of setting, right? Which I actually have never heard that there's different types of settings. So this was new information to me, which I thought was interesting, some food for thought, and I wanted to share it with you guys. So the first type of setting is a physical setting. It involves the physical location that the character might occupy in the story. This type of setting relates significantly to geography and the 5 senses. For this station, this is just how you would help students in, I believe, an elementary class remember the setting. So we don't need to read that unless y'all are interested in teaching a elementary school class at any point in time. So yeah, physical setting is a place where the action occurs in a novel. It is described with at least some of the 5 senses: sight, hearing, touch, smell, and taste, and creates a sense of mood that influences readers how to respond to a story. Number 2 is the social setting. Is likely going to be unfamiliar to students, but will draw upon their historical context. The social setting relates to the social context. That is, what would it be like to live within the social environment? How might the experiences of men and women be different within that society? What challenges or problems might people have within the social setting? These are questions that dig deeper than the appear of the setting. Somebody wrote something wrong there. And consider the nuances of how people behavior. Well, hopefully this isn't an English teacher that wrote this. So social setting is an aspect of setting that pertains to the human environment among which events occur and among which characters live or interact. So very similar to the social climate, right? Third type of setting that they have here is historical setting. This would be focuses on when events occur and when humans live. The time and place are essential to the historical setting. Historical setting is an aspect of setting that pertains to when events occur and when characters live or interact. Right, so that would kind of be covered in time, the time aspect of setting. And then their 4th and last one is the psychological setting. Absolutely the most difficult type of setting to understand, otherwise known as pathetic fallacy. It pertains to the way that the physical environment reflects to a way a character feels. Yeah, this was just written by some 5-year-old, it seems like. They really need to edit this shit before they put it out. Sorry, big burp. Pose the question, have you ever noticed that when characters are upset, it begins to rain and thunder cracks? This is a psychological setting of that character. When exploring the psychological setting, a psychological setting may be a reflection of what a character thinks or feels. Sometimes an external physical setting can tell us about the psychological state of a person. So I'd imagine it's just a psychological state is what they mean to say. The psychological setting is the same as a psychological state. I would hate to think that they literally just decided that psychological setting is just when they take the physical setting and use it to as some sort of a mirror for a character's psychological state. I don't know how many stories really do that, but either way, it is what it is. So yeah, psychological setting, historical setting, social setting, and physical setting are the 4 different types of setting, or I suppose 4 different aspects of setting that they said. I threw in the weather, I guess. I never put the psychological part of it, but I thought it was interesting. It was an interesting way to look at it, right? So, okay, now we're going to jump into 7 types of conflict in literature with examples. So, conflict is the next. Did I skip over conflict here? Oh, no, I think I put that last. Hold on. Yeah. Theme, conflict. Okay, yeah. So, conflict is the 4th most important component of storytelling. Yeah, let's go ahead and dive in, because there is a little bit here you want to know about conflict, different types of conflict, as you saw on the last slide that I threw up. There is different types of conflict, and it is a very important aspect of the story. If you don't have conflict in a story, your story is probably really fucking boring. That's the reality, right? You can still have a story as long as you have a plot, a series of events with cause and effect relationship, characters, people, places, or things in the story that make decisions that drive the plot. Particularly main character is pretty important there. You don't really even have to have secondary characters if you don't want. And then 3, you do need to have some kind of setting where the story takes place to inform the reader of where it's taking place at. And then 4th, though, because you got to think every story is taking place somewhere, right? So it's almost impossible for you to not have a setting. And then 4th, most important thing you need is some kind of conflict, okay? So conflict is essential to the plot. Opposition ties incidents together and moves the plot. Not merely limited to arguments, conflict can be any form of struggle the main character faces. Within a short story, there may be only one central struggle, or there may be many obstacles within a dominant struggle. Definition of a struggle or of conflict is a struggle, disagreement, or dispute between opposing forces in a story, usually resolved by the end of the story. So any struggle, disagreement, or dispute between characters in a story counts as a conflict. And like characters, conflict can be broken down into different types. 2 main types: internal conflicts and external conflicts. So an internal conflict is a struggle of a character against his or herself and or emotions. So this is a struggle within a character. This is that dichotomy between the character's want and need and the flaw they must examine in order to transform. Again, we didn't really go over that, but that would be an example of internal conflict. A really good, pop culture example obviously would be like Fight Club is an internal conflict because it is literally a dude who is crazy. Spoiler alerts if you haven't seen that movie. A dude who's crazy has an alternate personality fighting with that alternate personality, right? So at the end of that movie, when the 2 personalities are beating each other's ass in his head, that would literally be an internal conflict. It's as literal as you can get. It's in his head. External conflict, the struggle between a character and an outside force. So internal conflict, the struggle within a character. External conflict, a struggle between a character and an outside force. This type of conflict is what prevents the protagonist from getting what they want. So usually the external conflict comes from the antagonist of the story, right? Whoever is bringing the external conflict to the main character would be the antagonist, according to the definition for antagonist that we read earlier. So in what I learned, and this is interesting, I wanted to bring up this slide here in a minute because it contradicts what I learned. But what I learned is that there's only 3 common forms of external conflict: character versus characters, character versus nature, character versus society. And then you have internal conflict. So really 4 main types of conflict. Internal conflict, which is a character versus themselves, like Fight Club. 3 external conflicts: character versus character is your classic good guy versus bad guy. All the Avengers versus Thanos. Character versus nature would be like Twister, right? The characters in Twister fighting the giant Twister tornadoes would be a form of character versus nature, character versus Mother Nature. Think of me and my girlfriend just watched The Good Dinosaur. Was an awesome cartoon. And another good cartoon example would be Flow. We also just watched that cartoon, and that was an awesome cartoon. And both those cartoons, you had conflict between a character and nature. In Flow, spoiler alert for those of you who haven't seen either of these 2, both of them include a giant flood that washes away certain characters and that the main character has to survive from. And in both instances, in both cartoons, that would be an example of character versus nature. And then number 4, another external conflict type. The last one is a character versus society. The best example I can think of off the top of my head would be V for Vendetta, right? So you have that would be a society that's forcing characters, a character that has to fight against a society of people in order to, accomplish the end goal of the story. The society is trying to stop the character from accomplishing their goal, right? So there's other examples of that, but that would be the one off the top of my head. Those were the only 4 types of characters. See, we just jumped straight into POV after that particular slide. Those are the only 4 types of conflict that I ever learned. But apparently there is more. There is, in fact, 7, according to Chris Drew, Dr. Chris Drew here. 7 types of conflict in literature that writers use to create tension and drive the plot. So 2 categories, internal and external, that still stands. Internal conflicts are often the most compelling as they offer insight into a character's motivation and inner turmoil. External conflicts usually involve a character battling a force outside of them, such as another person or in nature itself. Here's your 7 types of conflicts. You have 2 types of internal conflicts. You have man versus self and man versus destiny. So I'm assuming that in this context, what they mean by destiny is a man, because destiny, isn't inside of you, right? I would assume that they mean like a character struggling to accept their destiny. Um, let's see. Yeah, internal conflicts, example, types of conflicts. I was interested in reading. Here we go. Man versus destiny. A man versus destiny conflict is a form of internal struggle where the protagonist battles against the predetermined fate or destiny that they believe is bestowed upon them. So it really is them fighting destiny. I would imagine that destiny is something on external to the character, right? You have the character, then you have their destiny, which is outside of them. But internal, okay, fine, whatever. The struggle involves characters trying to challenge and change the course of their life or overcome a perceived inevitability. So I would agree with that last one, attempting to overcome a perceived inevitability, like fighting with the emotions caused by the fact that you can't change your destiny is what I would have pegged. But it looks like it's them actually fighting destiny. So this type of conflict often involves a battle against oneself to take control of one's own life and make choices that could alter their future. The resolution can either be accepting the predetermined fate or changing it by taking matters into one's own hands. Like a boy who doesn't want to become a king or something. Well, yeah, definitely. It's them like fighting their destiny, right? So exactly, that would be a good example. Here's two more examples. Let's see, an example of man can be seen in Oedipus Rex by Sophocles. That's a pretty old school one. Oedipus tries everything in his power to evade his fate predicted by the oracle. Despite his best attempts, he ultimately fulfills his prophecy. Let's see, and the movie The Truman Show. Oh, that would be a good man versus society, in my opinion, because all of society is watching, Jim Carrey as he's in a TV show that he isn't aware of. Truman Burbank is living a seemingly perfect life in Sea Haven Island, unaware that he is only on a reality television show. However, as he begins to question his surroundings and doubt his perceived reality, he challenges what he believes was destined for him, being part of an elaborate TV show designed since birth. He decided to break free from what was believed to be his destiny towards achieving true freedom and self-determination regardless of preordained events. So, yeah, exactly, Cutie Pie. It would be like this person has a fate that they don't want to take, and they're struggling against that. Which is interesting that they count that as internal. I would have put that as external, but still, whatever. This is Chris's deal, so he can do what he wants. So, there's two types of internal conflicts versus my one type, man versus destiny, in addition to man versus self. And we have 5 more types of external conflicts. I had 3, right? I had character versus character, which they still have. They call it man versus man, but character versus character. Character versus nature, they have that one too, man versus nature. And then character versus society, they have that one too. They also have character versus technology, which is an interesting one that I think is perfectly valid. I'm still a little on the fence about character versus destiny. I would at least put that one as an external conflict, but maybe that's just my thinking. I'm just fucking stupid. But, I would totally take it if everybody else disagrees and it's definitely an internal conflict. Then, all right, I'll shut the fuck up. I'm wrong. My bad. But character versus technology, definitely feel like that's a valid external conflict, especially nowadays. And character versus supernatural. Interesting. Yeah, so again, I think a big part of supernatural, if it's like for a supernatural character, like a ghost, then I feel like that would more fall into character versus character. Assuming the ghost is a character in your story, then that would be more of a character versus character than a character versus supernatural. So I think maybe when it says character versus supernatural, perhaps they mean like God, like actually facing out against God or something like that. But let's look into some of their examples for all of this, what they think all of this is. So their examples for man versus self, just so you have a couple more. Crime and Punishment is let's see. Oh, okay, here we go. Here's a movie. We'll go through the films. Not everybody's read Crime and Punishment, but in there, the protagonist murders an old pawnbroker to prove his theory regarding morality through his practical deed, ultimately leading him towards severe psychological stress and guilt. In the movie Black Swan, that's a great one. Oh, that is one that's a really good fucking movie. But 2, that is a great example of internal conflict, character versus himself. So Nina Sayers is struggling with herself as she tries to become the lead ballerina in her company's production of Swan Lake. She faces immense pressure from her mother, director, herself, but mostly Black Swan which represents everything she isn't. Her fear and anxiety cause her to lose touch with reality as she battles hallucinations and paranoia while trying to find balance between her dark and light selves. Really good. Hell yeah, Chris. Awesome fucking example there, bro. Chris is my bro. We go way back. All right. Man versus Society. That was on my list. Let's look at his examples. A famous example would be To Kill a Mockingbird. Oh, yeah, that's a good example. Protagonist Atticus Finch goes against the town's racist ideologies by defending an innocent black man who is falsely accused of a crime. Atticus faces backlash and criticism, but chooses to remain persistent in his beliefs. That's a good character versus society. Let's see it in film. The movie Dead Poets Society. I don't know how many of you youngins out there know that movie. That was an old, oh gosh, now I want to say Robin Williams movie. One of his more dramatic roles. This movie depicts a similar form of external struggle where John Keating, an English teacher, I believe played by, now I can't remember his name again, not Bruce Willis, Robin Williams. Geesh, their names sound nothing alike. I'm mind fried over here. So John Keating encourages his students to break free from societal conventions imposed by their strict boarding school curriculum. Through poetry and literature, he urges them to follow their hearts, even if it means going against their parents' expectations, which leads them towards finding authenticity in their own lives. So, yeah, that's a good one against society. And this one is not necessarily a society of people. It's more the authority within that particular setting, which is the school, the boarding school, and the parents. Right. So, yeah, anyways, what did I say for V for Vendetta? That's what I said. V for Vendetta would be a character versus society, right? So, let's look at man versus nature. I still can't think of a good man versus society one, but there's a lot of them out there. Better than Dead Poet Society and V for Vendetta. There's a couple other good ones. But let's look at man versus nature. This is pretty self-explanatory, or character versus nature. In the book Journey to the Center of the Earth, Professor Leidenbrock continues his quest despite being faced with a vast array of geological obstacles like lava-filled caverns, subterranean oceans, and underground storms. All of that is included in character versus nature. It's a great example. In film, the movie Castaway. Oh, see, that's a good one. That's another good one of character versus self. But yeah, we witness how Chuck Nolan, played by Tom Hanks, struggles after being stranded on an uninhabited island following a plane crash. He battles with nature for survival with limited interactions while gathering resources for basic needs, ultimately leading towards self-discovery along the accepting nature's immense power and overwhelming beauty. That's a good one. Yeah, same, Flow, The Good Dinosaur, and Twister are all really good examples too. So man versus technology. I think this is a total valid entry that I would have never thought of. Man versus technology portrays a protagonist in a clash against an advanced technological force such as AI, robots, computers, or other futuristic technologies. So I would assume like Transcendence with Johnny Depp would be a good one. I think the number one example a lot of people would pick would be The Matrix, right? It's Neo versus The Matrix. How more on the nose can you get with technology, right? In literature, a prime example would be Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, where Dr. Victor Frankenstein creates a monster that ultimately turns against him, giving way to disastrous events, highlighting how playing with the power of transformation could result in unforeseen outcomes. I can see that, all right, that's fine. In film, The Terminator, of course. That's a great example. Demonstrates an extreme level of man versus technology conflict when a computerized AI system in Skynet annihilates human race post its sentience recognition, becoming self-aware by triggering Judgment Day, wherein all humans are destroyed by its army of machines. It shows humanity's battle to survive in the face of technological power and unstoppable machinery. So you can see how the Terminator would not only be man versus technology, but it would also be character versus character, right? Because the Terminator, whether it's Arnie in the first one or the melting guy in the second one, T-1000, right? They're both technology, represent technology, but their characters within the story as well. So, you could see that one kind of doubling as character versus character and character versus technology. And then the last one I was excited about was the man versus man. Let's see their examples for character versus character. William Shakespeare's Hamlet. wherein the title character's uncle Claudius murders his father, resulting in Hamlet's quest for revenge, leading him towards his moral dilemma, ultimately ending with all meeting their inevitable fate. And then example of man versus man in film, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Oh, there we go. That's really interesting. Talking about the most recent Quentin Tarantino movie depicts a similar kind of confrontation when struggling actor Rick Dalton feels threatened by rising star Roman Polanski moving into the house next door. However, events take a dark turn when followers of Charles Manson's break into Polanski's home to carry out horrendous acts, illustrating how rivalry spirals beyond measure if unchecked, ultimately leading towards tragic ending. That's an interesting way to put that, because I didn't think it was that tragic of an ending at all. Not in the movie, anyways. In the movie, that ending was hilarious, I don't want to spoil it for anybody who hasn't seen it, but, the Polanskis don't exactly get their ass kicked. It didn't happen in the movie the way it did in real life, so. Interesting example there, Chris. So, man versus supernatural. Okay, another type of external conflict is man versus supernatural. It involves a protagonist engaging in a battle against an entity smaller or greater than oneself, such as mythological creatures, ghosts, aliens, or unexplainable unknown forces. Okay, I mean, that's fair. If you think, I guess not, I mean, yeah, I guess, sure. I would assume that most, if you're thinking a character versus like Jason Voorhees. Jason Voorhees is supernatural. He doesn't die. He's technically a monster. Or Freddy Krueger would be an even better one. He's technically a demon. You know, yeah, that's supernatural, but it would be a character. Freddy Krueger is a character. It'd be a character versus character. But it would also be character versus supernatural too. So that's fine. I guess I can see that. I think I'm thinking of the movie, oh, what's that alien movie? Not the Fourth Kinds, Dark Skies. In that one, the aliens are far less characters because you hardly even see them. And for most of the movie, it's just people telling you about aliens. You don't actually see any aliens until almost entirely the end. You see like shadows of them, like little split seconds of them, but you're not sure if that was really an alien or not. It isn't until the ending of the movie that you actually see the aliens. So it's hard to call them a character per se, right? Like, I guess they are the antagonists. And they're very static. They don't change more or less throughout the entire story, and they aren't very round for the most part neither. There would probably be not one-dimensional but two-dimensional in the sense that they're just here to get what they want, which is a person in the family, and that's it, and it doesn't ever change. So they are a two-dimensional bad guy. They would be considered a character, but yeah, I guess supernatural. Okay. Supernatural forces can sometimes be represented as a metaphor for human fears and desires that exist beyond our physical world, but which indirectly impact our lives. For example, in Bram Stoker's novel Dracula, the vampire count. Yes, I think Hereditary would absolutely. Yeah, see, Hereditary would be too. Yeah, that would be an example of supernatural. I guess that would be a better example of it actually, because in there, yeah, it would be supernatural and character, in my opinion, right? Because at the end of the day, you have the son, which isn't necessarily the main character. I believe the main character would be the mother in that story, who's a badass actress, by the way. But her fighting with the son would be character versus character, right? You would still have, according to this guy's definition, it would still be character versus supernatural because she's possessed, which is as supernatural as it gets, right? But, throughout the movie, she's also getting a lot of, she is fighting some unforeseen force, and we don't exactly know what it is. We don't know that it's even a demonic force until the end of the movie, right? So spoiler alert, for everybody, if you haven't seen it, by now you should have seen it if you're into scary movies. So I'm going to spoil it for you if you haven't. She doesn't know that it's actually a demonic force that's threatening her until the end of the movie. See, that to me would be more in line with character versus supernatural, right? Because it is a supernatural force. We don't know that it's not necessarily the demon. It's the people who enacted this supernatural change in her life. So that's a really good example. You also have internal conflict in that movie too, right? Because she's battling with a lot of emotions throughout that movie. And in a lot of ways, her family doesn't, even trust her because they feel like she's going off the deep end. A lot of the characters in that movie, the oldest son included, has internal conflict with his own emotions, the guilt that he has for killing his sister, all of that, you know. So the husband has an internal struggle of accepting his wife because he feels like she's going crazy and doesn't know how to control that, feels sorry for his son and doesn't know what to do about that, right? So yeah, you know, there's a lot of different conflicts, and that's an important note that I'll bring up here in a minute. So I appreciate you bringing that up. That was a great example, Cutie Pie. But yeah, so let's see. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty self-explanatory. I thought it would have been something a little bit more. Oh yeah, that is a great point. The son also has conflict with destiny because it's his destiny to be Paimon, or Paimon, the demon. He's the body that he's supposed to be in. That's his destiny, and the kid clearly doesn't want that. He doesn't even know it's a thing. He's just fighting against everybody doing this fucked up shit to him, right? So that's definitely an example of self versus destiny. Which is very good. That's awesome. Yeah, good job, Cutie Pie. Geesh, I didn't even think of that one. Look at you go. Fucking, so yeah, example of man versus supernatural literature. I imagine most of these are going to be horror movies, but Stephen King's The Shining, where Jack Torrance's family moves into the isolated Overlook Hotel for the winter, only to be haunted by supernatural entities residing there that drive him insane, ultimately leading him towards his demise. That's a good example because that one, it's kind of considered the evil of the hotel. There isn't one particular ghost in the hotel that's fighting with him. It's a whole series of ghosts that more or less just represent the evil that has taken over the hotel. The evil itself is just its own entity almost. So kind of like in Hereditary, where it is a supernatural force that's taking over this woman's life. She doesn't know what it really is, right? Man's versus supernatural in film, Ghostbusters. Protagonists face an army of ghosts invading New York City, requiring immediate action by a group of scientists busting ghosts. It depicts a clash between everyday people and merely big scare many disbelieve. I don't know what that was meant to say there. Demonstrating how even when humans encounter metahumans or supernatural beings, they can find their way to prevail over them with human wit and intelligence. So there you have it. Chrissy Chris over here says that there's 7 types of conflicts. And I totally get man versus technology, and I understand character versus destiny. I'm still struggling with it being an internal conflict versus just being an external conflict. If you're fighting against destiny is kind of outside of yourself, but whatever. And then character versus supernatural, I get that. You know, still, I feel like a lot of times supernatural is also going to mean character, but there is an important point I wanted to make that Cutie Pie kind of brought up, that there is multiple, usually in a story, particularly a longer story, a novel, or in a movie, particularly a very well-made movie, there's going to be a lot of different kinds of conflicts a lot of times. When you get into really good movies that are really well written, and particularly novels, especially like a Stephen King size novel, that dude writes some big fat ass novels, you're going to get a lot of different types of conflict. You're going to get internal conflicts, character versus character, character versus self. You might have, you know, character versus technology, like Terminator. It's character versus character and character versus technology. Hereditary, as me and Cutie Pie were talking about, is characters, multiple characters versus themselves, character versus destiny, character versus technology, or character versus character, and character versus supernatural, right? So 4 different types of conflict all in one movie. But that's the important takeaway that we want from conflicts. As of right now, I'll do a whole stream where we dive much deeper into conflicts. I'll really go over how to make a good conflict, because, you know, you can throw in a character versus a character in your story. Every writer does. I do. Every story I write has conflict, and sometimes I'll get done writing a story and be like, man, the conflict is just dull. It's whatever. It's almost like the conflict itself is either boring, or it feels incomplete, or it feels meaningless, like there's not a lot of heavy stakes. And there's a lot of tips for writing good quality conflicts. We'll go over that a little more when I do a actual conflict stream. Right?
Hello,
so I have a little video here that we're
going
to watch.
Here, and today we are going to look at conflict. And conflict is...
Oh, okay, it's that. The movie started, or the clip that I wanted to watch started. So this is going to give us... this clip here is types of conflict. These people, who is this? Teaching intentionally. Okay, I've never been to teaching intentionally. Pretty small channel, only 8,000 subscribers. Hey, not like I'm judging anybody over here. I think I got 5 as of yesterday, so I'm on the up and up, baby. But yeah, so show them some love if you like their video. Teaching intentionally, I mean, obviously. But they say there are 6 types of conflicts found in literature. All right, so we're going to listen to what they say the 6 type of conflict are. Right, I haven't actually watched this yet, so we're going to see how it goes. They go over what is conflict, quick right. Yeah, we don't need to go into that. Internal conflict. Oh, gonna have an ad. We just want to see a different theory, because I wanted to kind of show you, this is what I discovered myself when I started researching all these different aspects of storytelling. Is like I kind of described in the beginning of the stream, there's so many different theories and opinions about this when it comes into the different types of conflict. Again, so many different people have so many different ideas on what conflict is, right? So, or how many different types of conflict exist, right? And so it really is a thing where you just have to go out there, read about it, learn about it, and then kind of decide for yourself what makes sense and follow that train of thought, really. So I'm just giving you another idea of what that looks like, right? So we're going to go into this, see what they have to say about the different types of conflict. Let me throw you on the YouTube screen. Put closed captions on. Okay, let's check it out. Where is my sound? Oh, I think I...
An internal is a first.
Okay.
Let's look at something we call internal conflict. So there are 2 main types of conflict. First is internal. An internal is a struggle between the character and themselves. And it's usually about the character's beliefs, ideas, or feelings. And this conflict involves a decision the character is trying to make. So an example would be you're trying to decide if you should skip school with your friends.
Okay, we're going to jump over this. This is just an example. Whoever these people are, they only recognize one kind of internal conflict. It's just you versus yourself, right? I can kind of see why this channel is a little bit of a smaller channel. I thought my audio was bad. This girl really needs to up her audio game. So, but let's take a look at her external conflict examples.
External conflict is the other type. And it's when the struggle is between the character and an outside force. So the conflict would be something outside of the character's thoughts and beliefs. It's what they're dealing with outside of themselves. So an example would be you're stuck outside with a tour we have and break them down even further into different categories. So let's look. How can we break these conflicts down? All right, there are 5 types of external conflict. So let's look at those. We have character versus character, character versus society, character versus nature, character versus technology, and character versus supernatural. Now, there are a couple others, but these are the 5 that we're going to focus on because we see these a lot in our novels. So,
interesting. So they gave us the same 5 external conflicts, but left out character versus destiny, the internal conflict. I do kind of want to, and then they said there are more types of conflict, which is interesting, which is true. I at least know that other people recognize more. I seen on a Reddit the other day, they had a list of different types of conflict and were trying to figure out which movie fit with each type of conflict best. And I mean, they had character versus God, character versus no God, which I wasn't even sure what that was. Character versus, technology, and then supernatural. I did kind of want to hear what she said about character versus supernatural, though. So give me a minute to listen to that.
Character versus technology. And so this is when a character struggles with something that is man-made. All right, finally, we have character versus supernatural. And this is when the character struggles with anything beyond human control, understanding, or forces not in this world. So this is Ghostbusters here, a classic where they are struggling with these ghosts and trying to get rid of them. But any sci-fi fantasy book typically falls in this category.
Okay. Well, pretty self-explanatory. But yeah, I wanted to just show you, illustrate the point that you're going to run into a lot of different types of conflict that people believe are out there, right? So it is, that list I gave you is not extensive. Even my list, after watching that and looking into it a little bit, I feel like I really need to it's down here. I need to up my conflict game by adding those extra conflicts to my list, right? All I have is those four. So I'll have to do that later after the stream. But yeah, so we're going to leave conflict alone for a second, and we're going to dive into theme. Okay, so theme is kind of a difficult one. Okay, let's pop back into this guy here. So yeah, theme is a kind of a difficult concept to understand. A lot of people get the idea of theme mixed with like the moral of a story, a motif within the story, a message that the story is trying to imply or give to you, an agenda that the story is trying to convey. A lot of people get all of those concepts confused with theme. So let's just go ahead and read what I wrote for theme back in the day, and then we're going to watch a short little video on what theme is in literature that I found. I did watch this video, and the sound is much better than the last video. That last video sound was pretty rough. So that girl was trying real hard, but oof, it was bad. So anyways, the universal ways the reader can connect to a story, examples would be courage, hope, love, friendship, are themes. Often it's the storyteller's personal opinion on the subject matter. A story may have both a major theme and minor themes. The theme is the story's big idea or underlying message about life. The central message, moral of the story, and underlying meaning of a fictional piece may be the author's thoughts on a topic or a view of human nature. It can be one word that embodies what a story is trying to say, or it can be a longer phrase. So definition of theme. The idea of a literary work abstracted from its details of language, character, and action and cast in the form of a generalization. The main idea or underlying meaning of a story. So that's actually taken out of the dictionary, that first bit. But in general, theme is the main idea or underlying meaning of a story. So basic idea of what theme is. Two types of theme that you want to know. Major themes, an idea intertwined in the plot that is repeated and supported throughout the narrative. It is a main or central concept to the story. And minor themes, simple ideas that appear more subtly in a story and are not central to the narrative's concept. So think of like, let's just take Terminator, for example. The danger of technology would be a major theme in the story, right? The danger of technology. But, accepting your destiny is a theme that's in there as well for John Connor, right? Terminator would also be a good example, actually, Cutie Pie, of somebody who has a conflict between man and destiny, right? Because it is, in the original Terminator 1, it is Sarah Connor's destiny to give birth to the man that's going to fight against the machines. And that's a destiny she struggles with because she's a waitress. She doesn't fight no machines. She doesn't want her child to grow up to be a war-torn dude who has to fight machines. But the concept of struggling with destiny is a much smaller theme. The story in later Terminators, there definitely is. They make it a much more central theme in the story. But in the first Terminator, in the second, I would even say, really, in the second, I think fate and destiny play a much more central theme. But in the first one, especially, there's very little runtime that is dedicated to the idea of destiny. You've got just a handful of conversations where characters talk about it and, characters struggle with it, but it isn't as much of a theme as technology. The dangers of technology would be a good, easy way to describe the central theme of Terminator. Because that's the entire point of the story, right? It is human beings fighting against futuristic technology that took over the world and is trying to kill all of humankind. So the dangers of technology is the entire point of the story. It's built in, it's baked into the narrative or the central concept of the story. Whereas a minor theme, like fighting against a predetermined destiny is a much more minor theme in the story, right? It's just not hinted at nearly as much. It is a part of the story. It does play a role in the story, but it's not the reason that the story is being told, right? So just a good way to kind of think of major and minor theme. The video I have also goes over major and minor theme. A couple different terms here that are useful to know when discussing theme. The moral. When people talk about morals of a story, the moral of a story is the moral lesson taught by a story or an ethical point or purpose of a narrative. So you want to teach people, thou shalt not kill. That would be the moral of the story. Why it's a bad idea to steal. That would be a moral that you're teaching people in a story. A motif is a reoccurring aspect in a story. Could be an object within the story or an issue that is continually brought up in the story. Is a reoccurring aspect in a story. Can also be two binary elements in a piece of writing, like bad versus good. A reoccurring salient thematic element, especially a dominant idea or central theme. So a motif would be an aspect of the story that is reoccurring, that is a salient aspect of the theme, a salient thematic element. So that's a little bit harder to describe, but I would say like I'm trying to think of a good example of a motif. And I'm blanking on one. So we're just going to move on. But let's go ahead and watch this video and see what this fella right here has to say about it.
Be yourself. We've all heard it before, but is it good advice? Well, sure, except that it's maybe a little too simplistic to cover every situation. Yes, be yourself, unless you don't know who that is, or unless you think it's someone different from who you actually are, or unless you've got too many selves to be all of them at once, or unless you're mean or selfish or closed-minded or conceited or dishonest, in which case, yeah, go ahead and work on that. Usually, the more we look at an issue, the more we can see the complexity lurking behind the easy answers, and the less useful we find simplistic advice like be yourself. That's why the best stories and novels usually try to avoid it. Instead, they show the big, complicated questions beneath the advice, like how do you know who you are, and where does identity come from? They develop themes, in other words, not morals. A theme is a central, unifying idea. It's the bigger issue that emerges as the characters pursue their goals. It has less to do with whether they'll win the race, or get the date, or find the treasure, and more to do with deeper questions about identity, philosophy, or morality that arise during their attempts. A moral, on the other hand, is a message, a recommendation for how to live. They can be useful for children who need guidance and simplicity to make sense of the world, but usually, the more we experience the world for ourselves, the more these simplistic answers feel unsatisfying, even insulting. What good is advice like be yourself when the self inside us is still emerging and ambiguous and half-finished and full of contradictions? There's a famous writer and writing teacher named John Gardner, and this is what he had to say about it. By theme, we do not mean message, a word no good writer likes applied to his work.
That's a very interesting message. Yeah, wow, that guy went deep right there, right? Holy shit. Very philosophical, man. I love this quote right here. This is something that I learned in a couple different writing classes. If you have a message that you want to convey to the reader, that's perfectly fine. But if that is more important than you telling a good story, then your story is going to be shit. That's the reality. If you have a message that you want to give to the reader, it's different than a moral, but you have a message you want the reader to get from this, and the reader understanding that message is more important than the person enjoying the story that they're reading or watching on the television, then your story is going to suffer because it's not what you're focused on. It's just like basic logic. This is, I was always told in my writing classes that themes are wonderful and are amazing and create a whole world of depth to your story. And again, that's why I put them in the top 5. Number 5 of the most important aspects of a story is to have a theme. Theme is a wonderful way, but if you can't help, if you writing your themes resorts in you just giving a message, every time you try to hit a theme, it's so shoved into the writing or so obvious to people that it becomes a message and not a theme, then you're better off just leaving it out of the story. You're better off attempting to not tackle that particular element. And I was always taught when it comes to theme, you try to convey the theme you best you can in a story, and people are going to make of it what they will. And they're going to have their own thoughts about it. You're going to get a lot of people who read your story and have completely different themes that they thought the story meant. Completely different, not different themes, excuse me, different messages that they thought the story was giving them. So, for example, I wrote a story just recently. Not recently, I wrote it a while ago, but I sent it out to a lot of my friends and family recently to read and got the story back and got multiple different ideas on what I was trying to get at in the story, right? I didn't really even have a message in the story. There was no who's good, who's bad, whatever in the story. The story was really kind of more just a character thing. A character has a unique talent that he uses to affect other characters in the story, sort of like kind of like a slight superpower. He uses it in different ways to affect different characters, and at first, the things he's doing are really funny. By the end of the story, the things he's doing are very dark. And then at the very end of the story, we are kind of left with an ambiguous ending. What did he do to the very last character that was left? How did he use this talent to affect that other character? One character, the first character, he gives a girl an orgasm with a song. Second character, the second character in the story, he makes them shit themselves using a song. And then third character, he makes them laugh, makes them feel happy and good because they're depressed, so he makes them feel happy. The next character, a dog, an innocent poor little dog, he actually kills it using the power of a song. And then the fifth character, we don't actually know what he does. I leave it open to interpretation. I do put in there little hints at what he does, but I leave it up to the people who are reading it what they think he did. And then, I give it to people, and then people come back and I say, what did you think the message of the story was? What did you get from that? What was the takeaway? And it was really wild. All the different takeaways that people got from the story. My parents especially had completely different, because there's a generational gap there. They had a completely different takeaway from the story. My dad's takeaway from the story was like, oh, this dude's a fucking psycho. That's my takeaway. Because my dad has a very close relation. He loves dogs. He's loved dogs his whole life, and he's very good with dogs. That's a animal that just brings my dad a lot of joy. I didn't know my face is gone. Yeah. I planned on not ranting, but I'll go back to my rant screen so my face isn't so gone. There you go, Cutie Pie. Since you love my face so much, and you're probably the only one watching, I'll go ahead and throw my face up here. So, but anyways, yeah. So my dad, that message there, your face is gone. Like, oh no, where'd it go? Anyways, yeah, my dad, he loves dogs. So when the dog in my story dies, oh, you're good, Cutie Pie. It's not your bad. When the dog in the story dies, you know what story I'm talking about, right? When the dog in the story dies, my dad the message he got was, oh, this main character of yours is a fucking dickhead. I don't like him. He's an asshole. He's a psychopath because he just killed a dog. And my dad would never in his life kill a dog. He loves dogs. They're incredibly important to him. He thinks they're amazing animals. And, so that's the message he gets from the story because the guy kills a dog in it. My mom's message in the story, was like, oh yeah, like power can lead people to do crazy things, right? The idea being that I gave this character crazy amounts of power and he decided to just control other people as much as he wanted. And she was like, yeah, power makes people do crazy things was her message, but two completely different messages, right? Which is the effect you actually want to go for in the stories. I was always told, and I believe that. I strongly believe that you want people to read your story and take away whatever they want to take away from it. And if you can, the reason, a logical reason why that is so powerful of a way to go about it is because if you don't tell people how they're supposed to feel about your story and what the message is supposed to be, then you leave open a much larger amount of messages that they could take from it. And so people can take messages away from it that are important to them, right? They can take away, you can write, this was an example that was given to me. One of the teachers of one of the classes I took, she wrote a story that had a specific message about men fighting nature. It's very lightly put in there, but well, thank you, Cutie Pie. I really appreciate that. You're so sweet. My girlfriend buttering me up, everybody. Thank you, hot stuff. Making me blush and shit on stream. So, my teacher, wrote a story about men versus nature. And then, this story got published. And one day somebody comes up to her in class and says, I loved your story. It meant a lot to me. And she was almost in tears. This young girl was crying and was about ready to cry over the teacher story. And she didn't really know what this young girl meant. She's like, oh, well, I'm really glad. Like what hit you so hard with the story? And she said, well, the theme of it, that message of accepting when a person you love is gone. My father just passed away from cancer, and then I read your story, and that message hit me so hard about how we need to accept that our loved ones are gone and still find a way to live. And, she broke down in tears, and the teacher's like, oh, wow, like, I'm so happy that my story helped you. That's amazing. Well, the reality was, and she, of course, wouldn't tell this young girl this, but the reality was that was never a message in her story. She did not put that message anywhere in her story. She went back, reread her story, and she said, oh, I get where that girl's coming from, because there is a character in the story who has a loved one who dies, and it is important for them in my story for them to get over that. And so, wow, that is a message in the story that I didn't even mean to put in there. I wasn't intending it, it just happens to be a thing that happens in the story. And, this young girl found this in this story, and it made a big difference to her. And this young girl still buys my teacher's stories, probably to this day, because it was such a powerful thing for her, right? So as a writer, here's the thing. You don't want to shove messages in people's fucking throats, okay? Because that's the only message anybody can get from the story then. You see, you're taking your audience of people who could get all different kinds of messages from your story that could mean a lot to them and could be the very reason why they end up liking you as a writer, and you're making it very teeny tiny. Now, the only people who give a fuck about your message is this group of people right here, the group of people who like your message. Right? That's it. That's the only people who give a shit. A lot of other people are going to read your message and be like, I don't fucking care. Because there's no other message they can get from it. They can't mistake your message for anything else because you shoved it in their goddamn face. So they're not going to mistake your message for anything else. Right? And so they know what your message is. And you know what? Some people disagree with your message. Some people would disagree with the message that you should just get over when somebody you love passes away. Somebody might not agree with that message. If you're putting in, say, a political message, oh, Jesus Christ. Well, of course you're going to have people that disagree with it, fuckhead. I always get blown away when I see people on any website, Reddit, YouTube, whatever, bitching because other people didn't like the political message of a movie, right? Somebody said, yeah, I don't like that movie because I don't like the political message in it. And everybody's like, you can't live. You're just being a freaking crybaby. And it's like, dude, and there are a lot of people, they'll say, that's not an argument to hate a movie. It was still a good movie. And it's like, yes, it is. That's a valid argument. You put a message in your movie. You put a message that you knew people wouldn't like, and so they didn't like your fucking movie. If you didn't want people to judge your movie based off the message, then don't put the message in the fucking movie. Don't make the movie about that message. By you putting a politically divisive message in your movie, you are absolutely warranting people saying, fuck your movie, because they don't agree with your message. What else would they do? Why do you think that people need to watch your movie and still love and appreciate it for everything else you put into it when the whole point of you making this movie was to put your political message in it? Just stop. Or accept that this is what you decided to do. You wanted to make a movie with a political message, and some people are going to like it and some people are going to hate it based off that message, and that's perfectly valid. I don't have a lot of political messages in my stories, but if I'm going to put one in there, I know some people are going to fucking hate this and some people are going to like this, and that's just the way it is. Some people, it doesn't matter how good the writing is. They're going to hate the story because they hate the message. And the thing is I'm putting that message in the story. I know it's that divisive. Then I realize that's going to happen, and that's perfectly valid. You can't bitch at those people, right? I just don't see the sense in doing that, in the sense of trying to make it sound like that's a bad thing to do. Like, that was warranted when you shove the message in the movie. You're shoving a divisive message in the movie. It's going to divide people. What did you... it's just like, I don't know. It's pissing in the wind and expecting it to not come back and hit you in the fucking face. It just makes no fucking sense. Just don't be stupid. Think about what you're doing and do it with purpose is all I'm saying. I'm not saying you can't even put a political message in your story. There's plenty of amazing movies with political messages in them. Some of them I disagree with. Some of them I don't. But plenty of good, amazing movies with political messages in them. Some of them I agree with. Some of them I don't. But they're still good movies. And the reality is, you can absolutely do that. There's nothing wrong with doing that. And I'm not even saying you shouldn't do that or advise against it. I'm just saying if you do it, understand that's what's going to happen. You're taking the audience of people who are going to like you, potentially like your story because they see a message in there that could mean something to them personally, and you're turning it into a tiny group of people, a much smaller group of people anyways, who agree with your message, right? And so I think I agree with my teacher who taught me that. What she said, you know, you can put messages in your stories. Really, you want to put themes, not messages, which is exactly what Mr. Long-haired pipe smoker is saying here. Let's pop over here. Mr. Long-haired pipe smoker here, John Gardner. By theme, we are here, we mean not message. A word no good writer likes applied to his work. And I do agree with that. You shouldn't want a message in your story. You want a theme, and people can take what they want from that theme. That's all I'm saying. So, big, long rants over. Let's anyway go back to what this fellow's saying about theme.
There's another famous writer named Anton Chekhov, and here's how he phrased it. You are confusing two concepts, the solution of the problem and the correct formulation of the problem. Only the second is required of the artist. In other words, it's not a writer's job to answer the world's difficult questions, only to show those questions clearly with their stories. In the story Boys and Girls by Alice Munro, for example, a girl growing up on a farm gets nudged from the traditionally masculine activities she enjoys, such as chores with her father, to the traditionally feminine activities she doesn't, such as helping her mother in the kitchen. She rebels, trying to stay in the father's world, but then, near the end, when he's chasing down a mare he wants to slaughter, he orders the girl to close a gate, and she swings it open instead. In doing so, she's still rebelling. She's refusing to trap the girl horse as she herself refuses to be trapped by her gender. But she's also choosing sides, and choosing the female side instead of her father's, which the father then uses as proof that she's, quote, only a girl. So what's the story's theme? Well, one perfectly valid answer would be gender roles. That's the deeper issue that emerges from the action. It's what the story's about. But if you want to take it further, you could also state the theme as a more complex and specific question about the topic. How do gender roles define who we are? How legitimate is that definition? Are gender roles cultural or innate? What are the consequences of enforcing them and participating in them? What other options are there? These are the more specific, complex versions of a story's theme. But the story never recommends what to do about any of this. It doesn't make a case for defying gender roles or accepting gender roles. It doesn't show you how to live with them or how to escape them. It doesn't offer any moral.
And that's an important note to make. That is a very important takeaway from this guy's example right here. I haven't seen or read the particular, I believe it was a book he was talking about. I haven't read the particular book. But this is a very important note to make here. The message would be to say, defy gender roles or just accept you're a girl and suck it up. That would be a message of the story. And like I said, if that's going to be the message of your story, okay, there's a whole world full of people out there are going to say, fuck you. In either example, there's people out there who are gender role traditionalists who are going to say, well, fuck this story, because I don't believe in that. I believe that we should adhere to traditional gender roles. And then there's going to be people who love to defy traditional gender roles. And and if the message in your story is you better obey gender roles, they're going to say, fuck you. I don't like your fucking story because I defy gender roles and I'm proud of myself for doing that. And you don't get to tell me what to do, son, you know? So that's the importance of not having a message in your story. Just saying, hey, this story is about gender roles and posing a whole series of interesting questions that the audience gets to answer themselves and decide for themselves what the message of the story was, is how you get both groups of people to enjoy your story. And I think that's important. I think, okay, I'm just it's just a teeny little baby rant, just a tiny rant, just one like that, okay? And then I'll go back. But, you know, think of it like this. This is a great topic to talk about. The gender roles are divisive in our modern day culture, right? People who accept traditional gender roles and people who want to defy traditional gender roles, right, are constantly clashing in a whole bunch of different facets in a modern day world, especially in what people call the culture war, right? There's a whole thing out there nowadays called the culture war. I'm sure every young person who's watching it is well familiarized with that. A huge aspect of that culture war covers many aspects, but one aspect is people who accept gender roles and people who want to break the gates of those gender roles down. Those two groups of people are butting heads. And it's happening in a cultural context where there's people who are trying to destroy traditional gender roles using pop culture, and they are in aspects of our culture. They are trying to change our culture to be less accepting of traditional gender roles, or at least be more accepting of people who don't want traditional gender roles, right? They can be doing one or the other or both. But there's people in our society that are attempting to change our culture towards that. And then there's other people in our society who are doing the opposite, who are attempting to destroy the new age idea of gender roles, and or attempting to convince people in our society to just accept the traditional gender roles and nothing else. And these two groups of people in pop culture and a whole different groups, pop culture in different areas of life in our society are constantly butting heads. That's a part of the culture war, right? They're both warring to see which side is going to be the dominant culture moving forward in our society, right? And here's the thing, like, if you write a story, unless this culture war is really important to you and it's so fucking important to you that it's more important to you than writing a good story, you shouldn't. You can write a story about this. I've written stories about this particular concept of gender roles, but you should, I again go with the advice that don't bring a message. Don't bring the message that you should adhere to gender roles or you should avoid traditional gender roles. Instead, give people a story that explores gender roles, where the characters, this story that he described was a very interesting and unique and really clever way of showing gender roles, right? A girl defies the traditional gender role. She doesn't want to trap the female horse because she feels like she's being trapped being a female. So she defies her father and says, fuck you in your role, son. And then he says, oh, well, that's what a girl would do. And now she feels trapped again in her gender roles, right? It's such a clever way of exploring what gender roles mean. How would you go about even defying them? What is the importance of them? Why is it so important that her daughter do the gender role instead of helping him out, especially if she's good at it, right? And so there's so many questions there that can be answered with that need answered in that story that you, the reader, have to analyze and understand for yourself and answer for yourself. There's so much to explore there as a reader. It makes the story so much fun. And nowhere in that particular story are they saying one is better or more right or wrong than the other, right? It doesn't offer any moral, as the guy was saying. And that is, that is just showing that this is a particular question that our society wants answered, right? It's just establishing the question, not giving you the answer. And you're not taking a side in this gender war, this gender role culture war that's happening in our society, right? You're not saying these guys are right or these guys are right. You're not saying anybody's right. You're just establishing what both of these people know is, what is the questions that both people have in this war? What is the importance of gender roles, right? And in doing so, you're doing something that I think is very special about art, okay? This is the rant. Good art transcends cultural barriers. It transcends boundaries from language, culture, race, religion, ethnicity. All of those boundaries can be completely demolished by good art. Okay, that's why you have white kids in Wyoming that listen to rap music all day, because rap music is a very viable, beautiful, and amazing form of art. And it can be so good, especially when you have a really high quality, amazing rapper. A white kid in Wyoming who's never grown up anywhere near South Central can listen to a fucking NWA song or a Tupac song and be like, whoa, like that was fucking dope. That was awesome. All right. Something went down the wrong hole there. Geez, my words, I'm talking too much. Anyways, people from any walk of life can listen to this song and see that it's powerful and amazing and awesome and get something out of it. And that's what good art does. In doing so, it brings people together, or at least it's supposed to, okay? It's supposed to. There's other people in the world now who have the saying going on where they want to stop people from listening to each other's art. Think people who got upset at Beyonce for making a country song. They're upset about that for some reason. People who are upset at white kids who rap, right? Things like that, where people just want to take cultures, suck it into, nope, only I get it, and fuck all the rest of you. And they're always going to lose because art isn't designed for that. You can never make art that's going to be of any worth to any society, and it's only made exclusively for a group of people. truly amazing art is going to be understood and appreciated by so many swaths of people from so many different walks of life. That's how you know the art that you create is beautiful, is people that never grew up around you understand what you're saying and love the art that you're making. And that's beautiful. That's amazing. That's what art is supposed to do, in my opinion, right? And so there's this thing that you can do with the story. You want to make a story about gender roles. You can do a very beautiful thing by making a story that's about gender roles and just putting it out there. These are the questions that need answered. Here's all the multitude of different ways you can think about it. You can make a story that both the people who are for traditional gender roles and the people who are against traditional gender roles can appreciate and enjoy. And what you're doing is you're creating a common interest. You're creating a common ground. Two different people who have two different complete views on the subject can watch the same movie and appreciate that art because that art still appeals to them at the same time on this specific subject. And through that, you are creating connections between different communities and different cultures. And that is, that is one way to stop a war, is to have two societies who intermingle and become to depend on each other, is how you stop a war. That's the reason why a lot of nations, even nowadays, refuse to go to war. Even though, American government and Chinese government might say hate each other, they're not going to go to war because we depend on each other, right? It's our economies are so intertwined that we almost couldn't go to war and destroy that country without them destroying us as well, right? You see what I'm saying? So that's one way to stop a war, is to take the two communities that are at war and smash them together and intertwine them so that they depend on each other. And how you do that is by creating common interests. Two groups of people seeing each other as people and thus wanting to come to terms with each other and understand each other. And art can do that. Art is powerful enough to do that. That's what makes art so fucking beautiful. Storytelling especially can do that. Music, painting, all of it can do that. It has the power to do that. But not when you are trying to tell people what the right thing to do is. That's the reality. Is if you want to make a movie or write a story about how traditional gender roles are the most important, or a rule about how traditional gender roles should be destroyed, you're only writing art for that group of people. And the other group of people is going to tell you to go fuck themselves. And all you're doing is making the war between the two worse. You think you're helping your side win, and that's all good and well. But, the point is then you aren't trying to make good art. Okay, you're trying to help people in a war win, is what you're trying to do. You're trying to help your side in a war. There's a name for that. You're not going to like it if anybody's listening to this point in the video, because we're almost at 3 hours, but you're not going to like it. The word for that is propaganda. That's the word for that. That's what we do here. Say in America, the government wants to convince its citizens to be okay with the government going out and killing a whole nation of people that we don't know anything about. What do? Well, they make art that makes that nation of people look bad. Think about the propaganda in the 80s during the Cold War. They made movies about communists and Russians specifically being bad people. Russians were almost entirely the bad guys in 80s action flicks. And there was a reason for that. That was propaganda. They were attempting to make Americans see Russians as not people, but enemies that we need to fight. So we, the people, would be okay with the Cold War happening. You see what I'm saying? That's propaganda. So when you make a piece of art that has a message for one side in a war, you're making a piece of propaganda. If you want to make a piece of art that says, let's defy traditional gender roles, you think, well, I'm just telling people what I think. And that's innocent and that's good and that's fine. But you are making a piece of propaganda, okay? Because you are inciting people on that side to fight on behalf of an ideal that you think is most important. Oh, crap. My headphones died. That's how long I've been talking to all of you. But anyways, long story short, that's the reality of the situation, right? So you again, you can do that. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. There's nothing against making that type of art. But again, you can do so much more by making art that doesn't take sides and instead brings two sides together, really. I think that's more beautiful. I think that's more incredible. That's the way forward in any and all circumstances, is you want people to come to terms with each other and essentially find a way to live with each other, right? So in any big giant aspect of this like modern day culture war, creating a movie with a message in it that says you must believe in this side's bullshit is just propaganda. And it's not propaganda that's helping this culture war end. It's only perpetuating it. The actual true artists out there are going to make a piece of art that doesn't have a message, but just explores the themes of this particular, whatever the aspect is that people are fighting over, whatever it is that they're fighting over. They're going to show you all aspects of it. And it's going to become a beautiful piece of art that people, these two sides can come together and say, yeah, that was a dope piece of art. And it did have a lot to explore and give them a reason to explore it together, right? So that's my 2 cents on it. That's why I think it's so important to not force messages in your story. This was a perfect example that this guy brought up. We're going to swap back over to the YouTube screen. It's a perfect example of why this guy brought up, because it illustrates something that is currently modern day, a difficult situation for a lot of people to discuss without getting pissed off at each other, gender roles. But it's a perfect explanation of why, you should just present the argument, not the arguments, but present the questions, and then let people devise their own arguments. Anyway, let's continue with what he has to say. He only had less than a minute left, so.
Why not? Well, probably because there are no easy answers to these questions, not in life and not in the story, which is why I think it's appropriate to phrase themes as questions. The best stories honor the difficulty of these questions by demonstrating them clearly, with all their maddening mystery and complexity intact, rather than slapping on some half-valid answer. That's what makes a story true, even when it's fiction. And it's why it's so important for us to understand a story's theme rather than searching in vain for a moral. Be yourself.
Okay. So there you have it. There's this guy's idea of what theme is, right? So we have a good understanding of what theme is now. I hope so. I hope you got a much better understanding of what theme entails. And I really love that guy's video. I think he gives a great example on how to separate theme from the moral of a story and from a message, especially because I see so many people, writers, people who discuss movies on Reddit and wherever, they have such a tough time separating theme from morals from the message of a story, right? They are slightly different things. And I think that video right there does a very good job of exploring what the differences are and, exploring why theme is also important. We go over, I had 2 massive rants throughout the course of that video. It was only a 6-minute video and it took me 20 minutes to get through it because, theme is important. It does need to be done right. Okay. So I wanted to go over this, 20 common themes in literature. This is just some common themes that you've probably seen yourself. Some of these books you're going to know, some you're not, but you're going to be able to pick these themes out from movies that you've watched as well, right? So 20 common themes. You got the circle of life, what goes around comes around, or, how death isn't death, just an evolution. Death feeds life, feeds death, feeds life, the never-ending circle of life. Very common theme. Coming of age. Gosh, we can think of tons of coming of age movies. The one off the top of my head is Stand By Me, The Sandlot, Goonies, for God's sakes. Amazing fucking movies there. Faith versus doubt. Faith in God is a big one. The Heretic is a good scary movie that just came out that explores that theme. Family and the importance of family. Very common theme. I think one of the best examples of that would be The Family Man with Nicolas Cage. Old movie. Some of you youngins probably won't recognize that. Oh, my face is gone. Where's my face again? Okay. Had to take a Tums there. So, fate versus free will is a very common one. I know there's a movie right on the tip of my tongue that's about that. But Romeo and Juliet from Shakespeare is a good one, I suppose. Good versus evil. Classic theme that you're going to see in so many different kinds of movies. I mean, pick one. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde would be a really good example of that they give. Hubris. Hubris is excessive self-confidence and the terrible decisions that arise from it. Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. Yeah, that's a really good one. I was going to think, Wolf of Wall Street. Great. Hubris is definitely a central theme of that, right? For sure. Identity is a great central theme. We just kind of went over that one just in terms of like, say, like gender identity, justice, what makes a society just. Again, the guy that we just, his video we just watched talked about themes are questions, not just a one word, but a question, like what makes a society just is a great one. The top one I can think of is And Justice for All or To Kill a Mockingbird. Two great Crime and Punishment. Two great ideas. And Justice for All is an old Al Pacino movie, which is a really good one. I think of almost any movie in a courthouse, that's almost always a central theme, right? Is justice. What does justice truly look like in this situation? Or how do we know our society is just? Or what happens when justice fails and all of that? Those are all different variations on that particular theme. Loneliness is a great theme, or a great starting point for a theme, the effects that loneliness can have, man versus nature, man versus self, man versus society. Again, these are all types of conflicts here. I don't particularly know if I consider those themes, but you can see how you can take the concept of man versus nature and turn that into the theme, right? Nature's inclination is to dominate the man, so how nature is more important, that how more powerful is Mother Nature than men, right? There's a whole bunch of variations you can make. When man versus self, how do you know who you truly are? That was a question they had on that last video. And man versus society, where do you fit in society? What do you do when society is unjust? Again, which is a great example of that. 1984, one of my favorite George Orwell novels. It gets quoted way too often nowadays. Too many people use that novel to shit on people they don't like. But yeah, that's a great example of man versus society, or what do you do when your society is crooked and unjust. That is a very central theme to that story. Power and corruption. Let's see, pursuit of love. Oh, that's a very common one. You see that. Cutie Pie loves that theme in movies, even if you don't realize it. This is a thing. People do gravitate towards certain themes too, for certain. And you can definitely, if you sat down and had a conversation with yourself, you might realize there's a lot of different themes that specifically that I enjoy in movies. If you watch through a wide variety of the movies that you enjoy, your favorite top 5 favorite movies, 10 favorite movies, you might end up seeing central themes that you personally gravitate towards. Right? Revenge, common theme in movies. Sacrificial love, survival, the environment, war. All different ideas. I would say good themes can come from. Right? So there's a never-ending amount of themes. So let's see this. Khan Academy is a really good, I really like that source for information. Let's just read what they have to say about theme, and then I'll probably let you guys go for the night because I'm over 3 hours on this stream. But yeah, have you ever read a book and noticed a common idea or message running through it? That's the theme. Interesting. See, they call it, say, the message is the theme, right? So again, people have different opinions on this. All the opinions that guy gave you in that video that I've been giving you are things that I learned in my writing class, which is going to be different than what a lot of people learned in their writing class. It's going to be different than their opinions on it. So you do some of the stuff, like I said, you're going to have to find out what your opinions are on it and then kind of go with that, particularly if it helps you become a more successful writer or more successful filmmaker or whatever it is you're trying to do, right? So what are literary themes? A literary theme is a big idea or a message that runs throughout a book or story. It's the central idea or message that the author is trying to convey. An easy way to remember theme is to remember that the theme is the message of the story. Very contradictory to what we just saw, right? But that's okay. Again, that's not one for one. This person wholeheartedly believes that no. The whole point of a theme is to give the audience a message, which is in complete contradiction to the last 30 minutes that I gave you guys. But it is important to note that this is very heavily opinion based, right? So themes are typically expressed in a sentence. Themes may center around ideas like courage, justice, revenge, love, like we just kind of went through that big list of themes. Themes are often found over and over in all kinds of literature, yada, yada, yada. They can be things like love always wins, hard work pays off in the end, one true friend is worth more than many false friends, it's more important to be yourself than fit in. Very funny, because that was the very first theme that guy explored in the beginning. If you recall, he said, that's not really a theme. Be yourself isn't actually a theme. It's more of a moral. So is love always wins, or hard work pays off in the end. That's more of a moral than it is a theme, according to the last video we watched, which I do believe that last video is correct in my opinion. Hence why I spent so much time, talking about that video. Turn it into a whole 30-minute fucking rant there. So how do you find the theme of a story? This I thought was the more interesting part. Finding literary themes can be tricky, but there are a few things you can do to make the process easier. Looking for patterns in a story. When reading a book or a story, look for patterns or common ideas that keep popping up. 2, pay attention to the characters. Characters can reveal a lot about a story's theme. Think about how the character's actions or words reflect the author's message. Another great technique is to pay attention to how characters change or what they learn throughout the story. For example, if the main character begins the story by lying about something and then apologizes and tells the truth at the end, the theme of the story might have something to do with honesty. That's a good piece of advice. Look for symbols. Symbolism can be give you great clues to help identify a story's theme. We'll go over symbolism a little later, probably in a different stream because we're already at 3 hours I've been streaming. Think about the title. The title of a book or story can give you a lot of clues to its theme. So, yeah, this is the part that I really wanted to read. I think this is really good advice. Whether you think theme is a message in a story and you completely disagree with all of my rants and what that last guy just said in his video, and you say, nah, fuck you, Tony, your beard is sexy, but fuck you, you're wrong on theme. Totally fine. That's a valid opinion. But whether you agree or not disagree, I do think this is good advice here too. When you're trying to find out the theme of a story, look for patterns, pay attention to the things that the characters are saying or doing, because those are going to give you hints as to the theme. Look for symbolism within the story. We'll learn a little bit more about that at a later date, I suppose. And then think about the title of the movie and what that might convey as far as a meaning goes, right? All good places to look for when you're trying to find the theme of a story. I do recommend, again, my personal advice is to take whatever you want to take away from a story. Because ultimately, I do think the better writers are always going to write stories that could be taken in many different ways. And no writer is going to tell you to not take that away from their story. Yeah, like that example I gave you with my teacher, young girl coming up to her, telling her about how important it was to her, the theme of getting over a loved one passing. She did not tell that student, oh, that wasn't a theme in my story, you fucking idiot. Like, come on, you'd totally missed the theme. It was about saving the trees, fucking dum-dum. Like, she didn't say that. Obviously she wouldn't even say it in a nice way. She would say, oh, that's wonderful that you got that out of my story, and I'm glad that my story helped you. Because you don't want to have to demand that people get something from your story. You really, you want people to get whatever they get, because that's, at the end of the day, that's how your story is going to become popular. People are going to take it and they're going to make it mean something specific to them. They're going to find a meaning that other people didn't. And if you're really good at creating art, you're really good at writing a story, I think that's going to naturally happen whether you like it or not. And it's something you should welcome. And so when it comes to you, the viewer, when you are viewing a story or watching a movie, and you're looking for the theme, or you think you found a theme, I don't think, what I like to do, my personal go-to when I'm looking for the theme in a story, I like to watch a movie, think about what it meant to me. I take contextual clues, things that were said in the movie, all of those tips that I just gave you, and then I will devise my own opinion. And then I will go out and read. And specifically, the first thing I'll read is I'll read reviews, what other people thought the theme of the story was. And I'll think about what other people have to say, especially if they give good evidence for what they thought the theme was. I will say, oh, okay, those are things I missed. All right, like maybe I'm wrong and this person is right. Like this is a theme, or I'm right, but this person is too. This is another theme in the story. Maybe I figured out what a minor theme of the story was, but this person found a major theme of the story. So, okay, cool. But then I'll go out and I'll find interviews with the director and the writer of the story and see what they said the theme of the story was, if they do at all. In most cases, like Ari Aster, the Robert Eggers, who just did Nosferatu, a lot of people were asking him what the point of the lighthouse was when he made the movie The Lighthouse. There was tons of people out there who were trying to ask him, trying to get from him, what the fuck were you trying to go for in this movie? What was the meaning? And his idea, he gave people the inspiration. He said, oh yeah, I took inspiration from my favorite Greek mythology. And then, I really wanted to tell a story that was based in this particular time period because I know a lot about that time period. So, and then he gave people a couple different pieces of inspiration that he took that helped him write that movie. But he never does come out and say, hey, this is the theme. In fact, there's a funny interview out there. You'd have to, it's not on video, it's in writing. I forget who conducted the interview, but he's sitting in the interview, right? And the guy's interviewing him on what he thinks the meaning of The Lighthouse was. Robert Eggers, the writer and director of that movie. Great movie if you haven't seen it. Willem Dafoe is amazing in it. So is that guy, the dude from Twilight. I'm forgetting his name at the moment, but they're both fucking killed it. Really awesome movie. Anyways, the interviewer asks Robert Eggers, so there's a lot of people talking, and they're talking about the homosexual theme of the story, right? The theme in your story of homosexuality and straight men struggling with their homosexual urges. And Robert Eggers said, oh, well, that's interesting. Like what in my movie kind of hinted towards that theme, right? Like what was in the movie that made you think that there might be hints of straight men struggling with their homosexuality? Why did you think that was in the movie? And he said, well, a lot of people point to the lighthouses. He said a lot of people point to the phallic imagery in your movie. And he said the phallic imagery. What was the phallic imagery? The phallic imagery is things that are shaped like a penis. He says, so what things in my movie are shaped like penises? And he says, well, the lighthouse. And Robert Eggers says, well, yeah, it's a lighthouse. I couldn't turn it sideways, like it's a lighthouse, I guess, yeah, lighthouses are shaped like penises. This is true. That was very observant of you, but he says, no, what he says is, that's great. That's awesome. He doesn't say, "Pah, you fucking idiot. It's not about that." He doesn't say, "No, it wasn't." He doesn't say it in a polite way or a mean way. He says, "Well, that's awesome, dude." He said, "That's what I love about the people who watch my movies is they take all different kinds of meaning away from my movies. In some cases, it's meaning that I didn't even know was there." And that is the perfect answer. That's an amazing answer. Robert Eggers is a badass. That's exactly what he should have said, is, that's awesome that you saw that theme in my movie. That is so badass that you saw this message in my movie, that maybe it's there and I didn't even think of that. That's fucking cool. Good for you. I'm glad that this message is exciting to you. That's the appropriate response. Again, I read that and I thought it was hilarious that he, like, the movie's about lighthouses, bro. If you're going to just, it's hard for him to, if in that case, if every lighthouse just reminds you of a giant wiener, it's going to be hard for this movie to not be as gay as possible, because it's not like he can turn the lighthouse crooked and make it a fucking, right angle, right? So, but, that's what people got from it. Some people got that from the movie. I don't know if that's true or not. That's what the interviewer said. I wouldn't be surprised if it is true. And who gives a fuck? Like, that's what people got from it. Let them get that from it. Don't crush people's dreams. If people watched your movie and liked it, and they liked it because they saw something in it that you didn't intend, let them enjoy it. It's art, and that's what that's there for. And that's, cool, dude. Especially if it makes them happy. Especially if it makes them feel like they were seen or heard, then it's like, well, fuck, dude, let them enjoy it. And that was the best answer Robert Eggers could give. Whether it's true or not, it doesn't matter. That's, so, for good directors and writers, it's going to be pretty difficult for you to find any information on what they meant to entail in their movies. There is still some really skilled directors and writers who will come out and say, oh no, the theme of my movie was definitely this. And if you got something different, go fuck yourself. Some of them do that. Most of them don't. Most of them will be like, yeah, no, whatever you think it is. Like, yeah, that's a theme. This is a theme. They'll point out like questions, like they said, I do very strongly believe in what that guy in the video said. Yeah, the story is about, what is life? What is the meaning of life? What is the meaning of love? What is this? What is that? How about this? How about that? He'll give you questions that the movie posed, but he doesn't really give you definite answers to what the message was in the movie. And you get to decide that for yourself. And as a result, people are going to come up with all different kinds of messages and themes. And I find that a good thing to do is just listen to what other people thought the message of the movie was. I always think that's a very useful thing to do, is go out, find people who had a different idea of what they thought the movie meant, and hear them out, hear their evidence out. You don't have to accept all of them, but it is always good to hear other opinions on what the message of a movie was, right? What the theme was. So there's some tips or some how I go about trying to find the theme of a movie. That's going to be a common thing we do on this channel once we get to actually reviewing movies. I'm personally, because I do this in every movie I watch anyways, I'm going to be rigorously going over the plot, the characters, the setting, the conflict, and the theme. Again, because those are my top 5 elements of a story. We had 5 more. The POV, the tone, the mood, the style and literary devices, and symbolism were the other 5 secondary traits of a movie that I thought were important. But we're probably going to have to leave those for another day, because I'm 3 hours and 20 minutes into this stream, which is the longest stream I've done, right? I deserve a fucking, I'm going to go up there and get a cosmic brownie is what I deserve. A cosmic brownie and maybe a pizza. Ooh, I might get a pizza. Some ice cream. No, that's too much. That's too much celebration. I'm going to give myself a cosmic brownie and a cigarette, and that's going to be my celebration for having the longest stream of my 4-week-long career. So anyways, a lot of rants going on there. Well, yeah, we had plans on that though anyway, so and yeah, that's always a treat though. I feel like I should be able to do that whether I did 3 hours or not though. I'm just throwing it out there. I planned on that even if I only did 15 minutes, all right? So all right, well, so yeah, anyways. Thought you'd like that. Okay, well, thank you. I'm glad you think so too, Hot Stuff. I appreciate you sticking through 3.5 hours of me streaming. So that was a long fucking stream. So thanks for watching all that. And to anybody else who watched it live, I appreciate that. Thanks for sticking through, and I hope you enjoyed yourself. To anybody that watches this on YouTube, I really appreciate you watching the video. I hope you got a lot of information from it and had some fun watching it. If you did, please like and subscribe to the channel, and maybe come check me out on Twitch, because really these kinds of discussions, especially film discussions, are so much funner when I get to talk to people. You know, I got my cutie pie here to talk to, and she's lots of fun to talk to, so I still get to have my fun. But it would be equally more fun to have you come in and chat with us and talk about the movie, right? That would be awesome. So, if you see this on YouTube and you have some time, I think starting next Monday, I'm going to be streaming at 11 a.m. now. So this was my last stream of the month. That was a whole month of streams down. Wow. See, so I do deserve to eat a brownie and some ice cream and cutie pie. I think I deserve all of that for getting my first month of streaming done. Next Monday will be my next stream. That will be at 11 a.m. in the morning, and that will be a Mental Health Monday, and I will be going over the Dark Triad. So Mental Health Mondays will go over psychology topics. We'll be exploring the Dark Triad. What is that? You'll have to tune in for it. If you liked the film theory stuff, like the film type stuff, what we went over today, storytelling and all that, the next one will be next Friday at 11 a.m. We'll be going over auteur theory. That's a different type of film theory. If you don't know about film theory and you want to catch up on it, check out, I have a video called The Introduction to Film Theory and another video called Introduction to Film Analysis. Check those two videos out, because you'll learn a little bit about them too. We're going to deep dive into auteur theory next Friday, though. So that should be a lot of fun. So anyways, that does it for me today. Thank you very much to anybody who watched. I really appreciate your support. That includes you, Cutie Pie. Thank you so much. And yeah, it was a really fun time. I enjoyed talking about this with you guys so much that I didn't even get through half of what I had planned for it. We'll save that for a later stream, though, probably at the end of next month. All right? So make sure you tune in for that. But in the meantime, you guys have a wonderful night and a wonderful weekend. And thank you so much for hanging out. And I'll talk to you later. Peace.